Nearly 5 years ago, we started one of our most ambitious projects of all time. We wanted to find a way to take our passion for history, particularly World War I history, and create a massive, in-depth documentary about it. The subject we landed on was none other than the Red Baron. The video we made was so huge and full of information that we had to put it out in 2 parts. All these years later, we never posted a way to watch it all in one part, and that leads us to today. For those that never caught it back then, which was almost everybody, this is our complete documentary of the life and death of Manfred Von Richthofen, the legendary Red Baron. With this documentary being 5 years old, there are certain aspects that may be a little rough around the edges that don't reflect our level of quality in the present day, but this will forever be one of the most important and moving projects I've ever been a part of. And I hope this upload brings some new eyes onto a project we're all really proud of. One last thing before the documentary starts. I wanted to give a special shout out to Helen Rodriguez. Helen is a close friend of the channel, and this documentary simply would not have been possible without her groundbreaking research and expertise. All other names that assisted us in the making of this project will be listed in the credits. Without further ado, I present to you the Red Baron.
The First World War was a war unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Global conflicts had previously occurred, but not on a scale like this. At the time, it was merely called the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. Sadly, it neither ended war nor was great in any aspect. Millions of men, women, and children were killed in 4 years of warfare. Never had the world seen a war kill so many so fast. Conflict was fought across the globe in all shapes and forms, in the mud and the blood of the infamous Western Front, among the peaks of various European mountain ranges. On the seas, great naval battles were fought between advanced battleships. Below the waters lurked silent hunters, the dreaded submarine. Finally, of course, there was the war in the air. Controlled flight was only 11 years old when the war began. What started with simple observation aircraft soon became another front to fight the enemy. Thousands would serve in this new frontier of warfare. Pilots from all nations would become heroes, so-called Knights of the Sky. Their portraits would adorn the walls of teenagers, similar to rock stars of today. The names of these men would become immortal, still well known a century after the war. But it was one man from Germany whose name towers above all others. It was, of course, Manfred von Richthofen. In his native country, he was well known as the Red Fighter Pilot. To his enemies, he was the Red Devil, or the Little Red One. History, however, remembers him as the Red Baron. Manfred went on to become the highest scoring pilot of the war, downing at least 80 aircrafts, a record not broken until the Second World War. He sadly didn't live to see that record beaten, as he was killed mysteriously in 1918 near the war's end. In the heat of battle, he was felled by a single bullet fired by a man who was never fully identified. In the many years after the First World War, Manfred became a popular symbol of the war, and it's easy to see why. A fearsome pilot in a red aircraft is hard to forget. Any film about the air war seemingly had to include a reference to him in some form or another. Perhaps it was the colorful aristocratic German pilot, or a feared ace in a red aircraft. In the 1960s, Manfred became a recurring character in the cartoonist Charles Schulz's beloved comic strip, Peanuts. His real name was never used. He was merely called the Red Baron.
His mission is to find the Red Baron and shoot him down.
A generation of children first learned about Manfred not from film or accounts of the war, but because of the immensely popular Royal Guardsman song about him fighting Snoopy. Nowadays, his name and image are ubiquitous, from video games to television to frozen pizza. He's more myth than human now, as far as the public cares. The man he once was, flaws and all, have been buried under the weight of mythology and nationalism. To historians, many still argue over the details of his final flight. Who fired the bullet that took his life? How and why did such a skilled pilot die so abruptly? Well, we intend to delve deeply into this topic. You will see the Red Baron as what he was, not a symbol, but a human being. A man of contradictions, sometimes admirable, sometimes deplorable. We will discuss his life, the legend that grew around him, and what happened on that fateful day in the spring of 1918. We will also chronicle the major events of the First World War in relation to the Red Baron's career. We will be busting myths and showing the conflict for what it was, a tragic conflict with no clear heroes or villains, a war of unending sorrows for those who lived and died. Manfred Albrecht von Richthofen was born May 2nd, 1892, in the town of Kleinburg. Kleinburg was a tiny little town in Silesia, a notable province in the Kingdom of Prussia, which was the largest and arguably most influential kingdom in the German Empire. Much had happened in Central Europe in the few decades prior to Manfred's birth. For centuries dating back to the Middle Ages, the lands of what is now Germany were made up of small kingdoms and states, some strong, some weak. This small patchwork of German states continued to exist century after century, despite some belief in a unified state. In 1871, following the defeat of France in the Franco-Prussian War, Prussian statesman Otto von Bismarck united all the German states into the mighty German Empire. Although this German government was led by a chancellor, most of the power was held by the emperor, or Kaiser. In 1892, the reigning Kaiser was Wilhelm II. While the German states were united, it was clear the state of Prussia led above all others. Among the many notable Prussian families was the Richthofen family. The name Richthofen means court of justice, which makes sense. Most of Manfred's ancestors served as judges and chancellors, not soldiers. Manfred von Richthofen's father was Major Albrecht Philipp Karl Julius Freiherr von Richthofen, a member of the 1st Regiment of the Cuirassier Cavalry. His mother was Baroness Kunigunde von Schickfuss und Neudorf, a noblewoman from another prominent Prussian family. Manfred had several siblings. He had an older sister named Lise, a younger brother named Lothar, and eventually a second brother named Bolko, born around 1903. When he was still a small child, the family moved to the town of Schwiednitz, the only home he ever knew his whole life. Young Manfred entered the world in a time of great peace, yet also uneasiness. Europe had not been entangled in a major war since 1871, and on the surface, it seemed like a happy time. The French even called it the Belle Époque, the beautiful age. But below the surface ran deep economic and political problems. Class divides ran deep, gender and racial strife were common, political assassinations were not unheard of, not to mention colonial disputes that led to the deaths of thousands of non-Europeans. But most troubling of all was this expectation for another large European war. A great web of alliances held the empires of the continent together, so if one were attacked, all would join. Each empire resented the other for one reason or another. For France, it was tensions with Germany over its colonies in Africa. For Britain, all efforts went to maintaining their great empire around the world. For Russia, it was maintaining influence. For Germany, it was expansion, to earn the respect they felt they so rightfully deserved. Instead of a beautiful age, it was a powder keg. A ticking clock, not a question about if a war would occur, but when. Manfred probably didn't think much about the political situation in Europe. He was a small child, but very athletic. He was known to do somersaults without using his hands. His favorite activities as a child involved spending time outdoors, riding horses, shooting, and above all else, hunting. Hunting was his great pastime, perhaps because of his keen eyesight. He was known to be quite competitive with his younger brother Lothar, always fighting to see who's the best at just about anything. When Manfred was 11, his father sent him to the German cadet academy at Wallstatt to be trained as a cavalry officer. Albrecht likely made his son enlist due to being forced out of the cavalry following an incident where he lost his hearing. He managed to save several soldiers from a river, but the action injured his ears. Manfred wasn't exactly excited to join the military, but he did as he was told. The same year Manfred became a cavalry cadet, two brothers in the United States, Orville and Wilbert Wright, managed to complete the first controlled powered flight in history. The age of aviation had arrived, and one of its greatest stars didn't even know it yet. While at Wallstatt, Manfred became quite well known for his fearless behavior. Academically, he was merely average, often getting just passing grades. He was described as diligent, yet quiet, not one to party long into the night. Like most aristocrats, Manfred didn't show much emotion, but he deeply cared about his family and his country. Much has been written about his personality. Some describe him as a stoic hero, others as pompous and egotistical. The reality was closer to the former. Although some of his writings were quite boastful, he was kind, but he didn't socialize well. He would be the type of person who would rarely attend parties, preferring to be alone. When not around fellow soldiers, he acted like a different man altogether. His mother described him as excited and cheerful. You could hardly tell he was a military man when he was with his brothers. One popular myth is that he had a long-term girlfriend, either before or during the war. Most reports never give a name, merely that he was to be married to someone after the war. Several names have been attributed to this woman, such as Heidi Jaeger or Leah Schwarz. It's another lie. Manfred was quite shy and nervous around girls, and there is no entirely trustworthy account or a document stating that he had a lover. There were rumors, but famous figures of history always attract rumors, especially ones over 100 years old. Some names like Heidi Jaeger are completely fictional. Others like Leah Schwarz were real people but not associated with Manfred. In reality, the legendary ace went to his grave, never having a significant other. After Wallstatt, Manfred attended the Senior Cadet Academy in Groß Lichterfelde, which he personally admitted to liking far more. After completing the Senior Cadet Academy, it was off to the Berlin War Academy. Manfred's many years of military study ended in 1911, with a graduation ceremony when he was 19. In 1912, he was given the rank of second lieutenant and a position in the 1st Regiment of the Uhlans Cavalry, a coveted position. During this time, he took part in quite a few equestrian events throughout Germany, proving to be quite a good horseman. In the years since 1892, there had been a series of arms races between the European empires. Relations continued to deteriorate, and now new modern weapons like the Maxim machine gun were far more commonplace. Aircrafts in general were becoming more viable in both the civilian and military capacity. France quickly became Europe's aviation leader, establishing the First Air Force in 1910. Other nations and empires followed suit, although its use in war was still limited. In 1912, a war broke out in the Balkans region involving Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and the ancient Ottoman Empire. A second war quickly followed it in 1913. Europe held its breath, but a great conflict did not occur. By 1914, warnings of warfare had become so commonplace that people like Richthofen mocked the very idea of it. If this great war hadn't happened in over 40 years, why would it start now? Little did they know, the spark was close at hand. Serbia had become increasingly nationalistic since at least 1903, and its relation to the powerful Austria-Hungarian Empire was tense at best. Many Serbians desired a united Slavic kingdom, and felt the Austria-Hungarians were a threat to that dream. Austria-Hungary thought little of Serbia and was always waiting for an excuse to fight them. Over the years, terrorism and violence in the Balkans became commonplace, almost routine. On June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austria-Hungarian Empire, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sofia, were sent to the city of Sarajevo in Bosnia. He was meant to observe some simple military maneuvers and later tour the city. He was unaware that 6 assassins from Young Bosnia, a Slavic revolutionary group supported by the Black Hand, a secret Serbian military group, were waiting for him. At roughly 10 in the morning, one threw a bomb at the motorcade. It bounced off Franz Ferdinand's car before exploding and injuring at least 16 people. The assassins were quickly captured, and it appeared that the attempt had failed. After giving a speech at the town hall, Franz Ferdinand and his wife got back to the motorcade and headed towards the local hospital to check on the people wounded in the blast. Unfortunately, the driver wasn't told about the change in destination. He took a wrong turn and stopped in front of Mort Schiller's Delikatessen, a local food store. Standing in front of it was the last of the 6 assassins, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip. Contrary to popular belief, he wasn't eating a sandwich. He was merely waiting. Hoping the target would show up, he quickly drew his pistol and shot. Franz Ferdinand was hit in the neck, Sophie was hit in the abdomen. Both were dead in minutes. Franz Ferdinand was 50, Sophie was 46. The murders left their 3 children without parents. At first, the world didn't think much of this incident, certainly not men like Manfred, who likely figured this might result in another Balkans war, not a global conflict. But while the average citizen in Europe went about their day, the leaders of these many nations were more concerned. The Austria-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph cared little for the slain Archduke and his wife, but the government believed the Serbian government had been behind the assassination. This claim is contentious to this day, but regardless, it served as a good enough reason for war. Military action would set off a chain reaction, however, because Russia was vocally protecting Serbia. They didn't share a treaty, but because they were both Slavic, they held a unique kinship. Russia was also allied with France. War with one would soon drag in the other. Tense negotiations between the empires began, called the July Crisis. Despite numerous diplomatic attempts, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28th. General military mobilization started across the continent, a process that couldn't be stopped. A last-minute attempt for peace was tried on August 1st. It ended with German diplomat Friedrich von Portals and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Sazonov crying and hugging each other. The peace was no longer an option. War was soon declared between Russia, Germany, and France. The empires formed 2 major factions, the Entente Powers and the Central Powers. World War I had begun, and few even understood why. There were some scattered protests, but for the most part, people were excited. Among those ready for this conflict was a confident 22-year-old German cavalry officer, destined for fame and glory, but not in the branch he had trained for all his life. Manfred von Richthofen's long-awaited war was here. His unit was assigned to fight the Russians on the Eastern Front. He wrote a brief letter to his family thanking them for everything, and like that, he was off to war. Within a few short weeks, most of his family would also be in the war. Manfred's brother Lothar was also now a cavalry officer. His sister Elise worked as a Red Cross nurse, and even his father Albrecht managed to re-enlist as an administrator. Before Manfred could even depart for the Great War, however, the first shots and fatalities had already occurred. On August 2nd, German soldier Albert Meyer was killed in France during a light skirmish. He was 22, and, well, soldiers dying this young were about to become tragically more commonplace. A few days later, Manfred reached his destination, the Polish village of Kielce. Instead of finding a great battle, nothing happened. The closest to action he came was narrowly avoiding a group of Cossack horsemen and locking an Orthodox priest in a church. He was accidentally declared dead early on, though, leading to his family receiving word he was dead, followed quickly by a letter saying he was alive. Soon after this incident, he was transferred to the Western Front and sent into the Ardennes forest. Germany's plan was to encircle Paris, causing France to surrender. They were using a military plan called the Schlieffen Plan. Instead of going through the French defenses, Germany marched through neutral Belgium. Britain, due to an alliance with Belgium and concern for its own empire, declared war on Germany. The world's largest empire, including colonies such as Canada and Australia, were now at war. The German march through Belgium was swift and brutal, with numerous atrocities committed by soldiers, spurred by paranoia and propaganda. Britain soon responded with a naval blockade of Germany, hoping to starve the entire country. Manfred reached the front on August 21st. The day before, a major aviation milestone had occurred. An Austrian-Hungarian aircraft had been shot out of the sky by rifle fire, becoming the first plane lost to enemy fire. Manfred likely wasn't aware of this event, although he had seen a few aircraft in the sky during the march. He was still focused on cavalry. Like most people, he didn't think much of airplanes at the time. He was eager for combat, to prove himself, and to best his little brother Lothar, who was already fighting the French. His first battle did not go smoothly. Manfred and 15 of his men saw some French dragoons in the woods and chased after them. They were led directly into an ambush. His unit was quickly surrounded, and Manfred was nearly killed in the skirmish. He later wrote about his hatred for the French and surprise attacks, which is ironic as in a few years he would be known for similar tactics. On the same day of Manfred's ambush, the German military was seeing great success. The French were being beaten at the Battle of the Frontiers, and the British Army's first engagement, the Battle of Mons 2 days later, was a strategic German victory despite heavy losses, and something we actually briefly covered on the channel before, albeit quite horribly. In the east, the Battle of Tannenberg was about to start, which would result in the near destruction of a Russian army. Entente losses were piling up. 27,000 French soldiers died on August 22nd alone. Politicians fled Paris, as many feared the worst. The German military seemed unstoppable, but all that changed because of a single aircraft. As Entente reconnaissance plane discovered a gap in the German armies. Prior to this moment, the use of airplanes was minimal, as observation was usually limited to balloons. This one instance showed how valuable aircrafts could be. Both the British and French threw everything they had at the gap, and one of the German generals panicked and retreated. The battle was called the First Battle of the Marne, but would famously become known as the Miracle on the Marne. German casualties for the entire Schlieffen Plan offensive numbered at least 300,000. Entente losses were also in the hundreds of thousands. Paris was saved, and both factions quickly tried to outflank each other in an event known as the Race to the Sea. When this failed, the Entente and Central Powers began digging. Trench lines were dug from the North Sea to the Alps. Mobile warfare had ended, and the era of trench warfare had only begun. The French countryside was transformed into a series of fortified lines, and in between them lay no man's land, a truly dead earth where little could grow, tarnished by artillery, bullets, and thousands of mangled corpses. Manfred himself didn't witness combat after August 21st. He merely did several scouting patrols in that time frame. He was later awarded a medal for his only moment of frontline fighting. With the beginning of trench warfare, his unit disbanded. The German generals felt the men in Manfred's unit were more useful in the trenches. Manfred was soon transferred to his low-key role of supply officer, a job he loathed. He was stationed near the ancient city of Verdun. The average day consisted of sitting around doing little, broken up occasionally by artillery and sniper fire. While he stayed in the trenches keeping track of supplies, the war continued to be fought in new frontiers. On September 22nd, 3 British cruisers were sunk by a German submarine, better known as a U-boat. War under the waves was to become another front to fight the enemy. At the same time, the war in the air was also beginning to heat up. At first, pilots on both sides of the conflict flew by and merely waved. This kindness lasted only weeks. After the Miracle on the Marne, the airplane proved its usefulness in war. It was to be used chiefly for reconnaissance of enemy positions and to direct artillery. Both sides realized these aircrafts had to be destroyed. Shooting down a plane proved difficult. One couldn't just shoot through the propellers, for that guaranteed a violent death via crash. Pilots tried everything: service revolvers, throwing rope or darts. None worked. An early solution was giving the second seat observer a machine gun or rifle. This proved to sometimes work. On October 5th, French pilot Joseph Franz and his gunner Louis Quinault shot down a German reconnaissance plane. The pilot Wilhelm Schlichting was killed. The development of interceptors or fighter planes was soon prioritized. Plane designs like the Pusher and aircraft with the propeller in the rear were quickly thrown into service, although they tended to be very slow. Young kids were rapidly joining this new, developing military branch. However, Manfred was not one of them yet. He spent the rest of 1914 doing paperwork and keeping track of supplies. He was still a supply officer that Christmas when the legendary Christmas truce occurred. A short, happy moment of peace for a day between German and British troops, in a war famous for lacking humanity. The day after, it was back to killing each other. Such event would never, ever happen again. By the end of 1914, the Ottoman Empire had joined the Central Powers, and the war continued to expand around the world. For those on the Western Front, expansion was a word rarely used. It was pretty clear by now that the war wouldn't be over anytime soon. Life in the trenches was quite often dull. A man like Manfred must have hated the boredom fiercely. News from his brother Lothar on the Eastern Front, where movement was still common, only made things worse for Manfred. Occasionally during those long months, he would look up above the trenches to see a beautiful aircraft flying among the clouds. It's not hard to imagine the young Prussian dreaming of fighting in the air. It was a dream he would one day accomplish. By April 1915, Manfred von Richthofen was at his wit's end with trench warfare. While his former classmates and cousins bled and died on the battlefield, he was still stuck behind the lines. He had been transferred to being an ordnance officer, but he still remained near Verdun. He hated this job almost as much as being a supply officer. In between inspections, he would sneak away to hunt in the woods. This was his only escape from boredom. In that time frame, many battles and operations had occurred. In February, the costly Gallipoli campaign had begun in the Dardanelles. Led by the Australians, it would end in failure a year later, with at least 300,000 Entente casualties alone. In March, the Entente launched the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle, after getting good quality photographs from the British Air Service, the Royal Flying Corps. It led to minor territory gain, but again showed the increasing value of aircrafts. The next significant advancement in the air war would also occur that April. French aviation pioneer Roland Garros managed to get a machine gun to fire through the propellers without destroying the engine. He added protective wedges that deflect bullets when they struck the propeller. It was crude, but mostly effective. On April 1st, he managed to down a German aircraft with his method. He would down a total of 4 planes before being shot down himself later in the month. Garros survived this crash only to be captured by the Germans. All of this was big news, but not as big as the introduction of another weapon, a weapon that Manfred likely hoped would end the stalemates on the Western Front. April 25th, 1915 was the day the Second Battle of Ypres began. It was also the first major use of chemical weapons in the conflict. The Germans used chlorine gas to try and break the British lines. The new weapon killed as many as 1,000 soldiers over the course of the battle. Despite the terror invoked by this new weapon, the British managed to mostly hold the line, in part due to the efforts of Canadian soldiers. Manfred likely was reading about this battle when he received a letter from High Command. He was ordered to return back to his role as a supply officer, but now even further back behind the front lines. This was the last straw. Manfred refused to spend the rest of the war running inspections. It was at this moment that he worked up the courage to ask for a transfer to the position he had been dreaming of. Manfred sent a letter back with this blunt response. "My dear Excellency, I have not gone to war in order to collect cheese and eggs, but for another purpose." He then demanded a transfer to the German flying service. He probably expected to be disciplined for such a letter, but he wasn't. A month later, the request was granted. The young soldier couldn't wait for the train in Cologne, where his new future awaited. Manfred spent 4 weeks training in Cologne. His role was to be the observer in a recon plane. He paid close attention to the many classes on navigation, observation, and photography, despite not having an interest in the subject. He never forgot his first takeoff. The strong winds generated by the propeller made his helmet wobble, his scarf nearly fly off, and his jacket ripple with every spin. He hated every second of it at first. Suddenly, the plane shook violently as it began to fly down the runway. This terrified Manfred at first, but then the shaking stopped. He felt weightless, like a bird in the sky. He could see for miles. The sight of how small the world looked when in the clouds made the entire experience worth it. He later wrote of the event. It was a glorious feeling to be so high above the earth, to be the master of the air. I didn't care one bit where I was, and I felt extremely sad when my pilot thought it was time to go down again. Manfred, after finishing his flying test, was rated good enough to complete his training. After finishing said training in Grossenhain, he was transferred to the Eastern Front again, ready to serve as an observer. It was June of 1915, and perhaps the greatest innovation in the air war had just been produced. Following the German military's encounter with Roland Garros, it was decided that finding a way to shoot through the propeller would be the best course of action. Garros' deflector design was considered flawed and wouldn't be copied. Many ideas were tested, but none were reliable. The breakthrough came from when Anthony Fokker, a Dutchman working with the Germans, came up with a tool he called the synchronization gear. It was a device that stopped the machine gun from firing when the propeller blade was in front of the weapon, but when the blade was out of the way, it would function properly. This reduced the rate of fire to almost semi-automatic speeds, but allowed the pilot to look down the sights of the weapon, fire, hit the enemy, and not damage the propeller. The design was quickly thrown onto a prototype aircraft, a monoplane called the Fokker Eindecker. The results were more successful than anyone could have hoped. While nothing special on its own, this single-seated fighter plane quickly tore apart the now obsolete British and French aircrafts entirely due to the synchronization gear. Between July 1915 and January 1916, the German military effectively controlled the skies. This period became known as the Fokker Scourge. Manfred, of course, was unaware of such developments. He was just happy to be in the air. His aircraft was assigned to the 6th Austrian Corps under General August von Mackensen. His first pilot was a colorful German by the name of George Zümmer. Zümmer was dying of tuberculosis, so he was well known to be reckless and daring, which endeared him to Manfred. Barely a day passed when he wasn't in the air with his Albatross C-1. The role gave him purpose. Bringing in information involving Russian troop movements was gratifying work. Eventually, Zümmer transferred, and in his place came Karl Friedrich Erich Graf von Holck, another Prussian aristocrat who held the rank of Count. Count von Holck was also quite the daring pilot. In one notable instance, his flight skills nearly killed both him and Manfred. Smoke from a burning town stopped the plane's engine, forcing a crash near the Russian army. True to his calm, under-pressure demeanor, Manfred wasn't horrified at almost dying. He later wrote of this moment, quote, "It is stupid after all, to die so unnecessarily, a hero's death." For the second time in just as many years, Manfred had narrowly avoided death without a scratch on him. By August, the Russians had been removed entirely from Prussia and Poland. The military situation seemed to be going quite well, unlike the Western Front. This led Manfred to be transferred once again to France, this time to serve in a secret new unit. It was called the Brieftauben Abteilung Ostend, or BAO for short. That name roughly translated to Ostend Carrier Pigeons, an innocent enough sounding name. In reality, it was a bomber group established to eventually attack England. While Zeppelins were more or less the first bombers, they were only somewhat effective, and this new group was designed to improve on that. The new aircraft, the AEG-G2, was designed for a long-distance flight. Although the proposed bombing of England was eventually scrapped, for the time being, the aircraft proved useful in bombing targets in Belgium and France. Manfred personally didn't like the large, slow-moving vehicle, but he did his best with it anyway. His bomber pilot was, by chance, George Zümmer. At the very least, Manfred was glad to see his friend again. While the two were training with the AEG-G2, two German pilots were making a name for themselves with the Eindecker. Pilots Max Immelmann and Oswald Boelke were becoming national heroes. They were the first of a new breed, the fighter ace. History's first ace had been the French pilot Adolphe Pégoud, a former flight instructor. Ironically, he was killed at the age of 26 in August by one of his former students. The way one became an ace seemed simple, just shoot down 5 enemy planes, but there was hardly a manual to teach air combat. Fighting another aircraft in so-called dogfights proved quite tricky. Despite this, Immelmann and Bolke managed it. Manfred read about the two pilots and soon enough was idolizing both pilots, especially Bolke. He wished he could be in a single-seat fighter like them, yet he pressed on with his current duties. Now serving as a gunner, Manfred's time as a bomber crew member proved middling at best. He often wanted to see the bombs hit the ground, but it just wasn't possible. In one instance, he tried to lean over to see the explosion, forgetting about the large propeller next to him. The tip of one of his fingers was lost, ironically his first wound of the war. September 1st was the day Manfred finally got to fire at an enemy aircraft. A British fighter tried to destroy his bomber. Armed with only a semi-auto rifle, Manfred attempted to shoot the British plane down by himself, but failed. On another occasion, a few weeks later, and now armed with a machine gun, Manfred managed to shoot down an aircraft. Sadly, the plane crashed behind enemy lines and, as a result, wasn't officially credited. The German standard for crediting aerial kills usually relied on the plane crashing behind friendly lines. In October, Manfred and Zoomer were transferred to another bomber group, this time in Metz. Zoomer wouldn't be his pilot anymore. He was given an Eindecker fighter and was told to escort bombers. This was a position Zoomer had been aiming to get since September. By complete chance, on the train ride to Metz, Manfred met his hero. During dinner, he happened to pick a seat right next to Oswald Bolke. The two briefly talked about what it's like to shoot down an aircraft, and Bolke even shared a few tips. You fly close, aim well, and they fall. When the train arrived in Metz, Manfred was certain his true calling was to be a fighter pilot. He wanted to be a great German hero. After taking a few private lessons from Zoomer and following a spectacular flight crash, Manfred attempted the German pilot examination. Surprisingly, the young aviator failed, leading to another month of practicing. On his second attempt, he managed to pass the test. He was sent to Berlin for further training, with it now being the middle of November. To pass the time between tests, Manfred would spend time hunting boars and proudly stating he had one-upped his little brother Lothar. During his flight training, the Western Front remained mostly in stagnation. The British started using chemical weapons, first at Loo in late September, but little progress was made. Elsewhere around the world, fighting continued in places like Africa, the Middle East, and the mountains of the Alps. Italy had just entered the war on the Entente side in May, leading to just another front for men to fight and die by the thousands. With Italy's entry, the Entente slowly became known under a different name, the Allies. That same month, the British ocean liner, the Lusitania, had been sunk by a German U-boat, killing 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. The event strained relations between Germany and the United States. On Christmas Day 1915, Manfred received word that all of his tests were complete. He was now officially a pilot of the German flying service, but he wouldn't see action until March of 1916. Manfred wrote to his brother Lothar, encouraging him to join the air service, which he promptly did. For the rest of Christmas, Manfred managed to get some time off and visit family. For the only time in the war, every member of the Richthofen family was together. Manfred's mother, Kunigunde, vividly remembered playing the piano at night, with only candles illuminating the grand Christmas tree in the room. Manfred and Ilse spent time singing. He dressed as a pilot, she dressed as a nurse. Lothar sat and cheered, for he couldn't sing at all, and little Boko smiled all the while. It was a wonderful occasion, which sadly never again repeated. The year ended with staggering losses on both sides. Among just the British, they had suffered 285,000 casualties. The German losses were even worse, sitting at 450,000 casualties. To try and counter the Fokker scourge, the Allies began having aircraft fly in formation like birds. They hoped this would be enough to reduce losses. They weren't. The year ended with hundreds of planes lost and countless more lives wasted. The year also bore witness to full-blown genocide. Since April, the Ottoman Empire had been rounding up and exterminating an Orthodox Christian minority called the Armenians. The leading cause was supposed disloyalty, as some Armenians fought with the Russians. Over 1 million would be killed by the war's end. But most of the world cared more about their own dead and not the lives of innocent men, women, and children in Asia Minor. When looking at such high casualty rates, it's easy to believe the myths of lions led by donkeys, the notion that foolish generals sent thousands to their death with little care. The reality was more complicated. Both sides had generals who were competent and incompetent. The sad truth is, large-scale assaults across no man's land were often the only possible way of attack. The advancements in technology during the conflict was spurred on in hopes of avoiding mass slaughter. The Allies and the Central Powers entered 1916 with hopeful optimism. Perhaps this would be the year of the great breakthrough that would end the war. Within just a few months, it would quickly become a year full of horrific battles, with few comparisons in human history. It was also the year Manfred von Richthofen's legend would begin. He would soon enough be more than just another German pilot. (1916). A year that would feature no less than 3 of the bloodiest battles in the conflict began innocently enough. For the beginning days, there was little activity across the Western Front. In the air, it was a different story. The age of the Fokker Scourge came to an end in those months. It was only a matter of time until the Allies were able to replicate the synchronization gear, and by 1916, they had done just that. Allied planes were also becoming better made. Aircrafts like the French Nieuport 11 and the British FE-2B, more than capable of countering the Eindecker. Air superiority quickly turned toward the Allies' favor. On February 21st, the Battle of Verdun began in earnest. The operation was of course intended to capture the titular French city. The battle commenced with a massive artillery bombardment. 800 guns fired at least 1 million shells on that day alone, burying alive countless French soldiers. The attack began later that day, and in the weeks to come, some of the worst fighting in the entire war would occur. Places like Le Mort-Homme, Fort Vaux, and Côte 304 bore witness to suffering unlike any other. Men died from bullets, stabbings, shrapnel, suffocation, and even dehydration. Verdun was the longest battle of the war. It finally came to an end in December with nearly 1 million casualties on both sides. Manfred von Richthofen would enter his new unit in the month of March, just after the beginning of the battle. There was a catch, however. While he was assigned to the Champagne sector, which was close to the battle, he was to fly a 2-seater Albatros aircraft, not a single-seat fighter. Although greatly disappointed, Manfred kept it to himself. He did find a way to get around the issue, for there was no military protocol that prevented him from adding a machine gun to the aircraft. One day he spotted a downed Nieuport 11 and noticed the French attached the machine gun to the wings, so he jury-rigged a machine to fire from a similar position. On April 26th, he got his first chance to try out his contraption. He spotted a Nieuport right below his plane and chose to dive after it. The French pilot noticed and started to flee, but not before Manfred managed to empty several rounds into the plane. It sputtered and eventually lost control, crashing near Fort Douaumont. Manfred's excitement was somewhat dulled when he was told yet again this kill didn't count, because it crashed behind the French lines. On April 30th, during a routine patrol, he noticed a fellow Eindecker being attacked by 3 French pilots. Before he could do anything, the Eindecker suddenly took a nosedive and crashed. Later on, he was told the pilot had been his old friend Count von Holk. He was only 30 years old, having died from a bullet to the head. Manfred didn't let on to anyone that his friend's death impacted him greatly. A few weeks later, he finally got his chance to fly an Eindecker, even if the plane was now outdated. Despite crashing his aircraft, he enjoyed the experience immensely. As the Battle of Verdun raged on, Manfred was abruptly transferred to the Eastern Front once again, this time to Kovel, Ukraine. At first, pilots like Manfred probably didn't understand why they were transferred so quickly. These men weren't thinking of the Eastern Front. They were either still thinking of the long, grueling campaign in France, or the recent major naval battle of Jutland. The reason for this transfer was simple. One of the largest battles of the war was about to start. In an effort to pull some German troops away from Verdun, French General Joseph Joffre managed to convince several Allied nations to start planned offensives sooner than expected. The types of battles the Germans couldn't afford to ignore. On the Russian side, this plan fell to General Alexei Brusilov, considered one of Russia's finest officers. He planned a massive assault in Galicia. The Austria-Hungarian Empire was usually considered the weakest member of the Central Powers. Germans often referred to the situation as being shackled to a corpse. Brusilov believed that if his offensive were strong enough, it not only would distract the Germans, but effectively knock Austria-Hungary out of the war. This great battle, collectively known as the Brusilov Offensive, began on June 4th. It would rage on until September, ultimately failing to defeat Austria-Hungary, but only just. Casualties were unspeakably high, with as many as 1.3 million soldiers on both sides either being wounded or killed. It was one of the deadliest military operations in world history. It's little shock that the Germans quickly transferred pilots to help fight the Russians. Manfred flew some bombing raids through June and July. While important, he greatly preferred to be on the Western Front, especially in the month of July. On July 1st, the British Somme offensive began. Similar to the Brusilov offensive, it was intended to take the pressure off the French at Verdun. The first day of the campaign is often called the bloodiest day in British military history. In just 24 hours, over 19,000 British soldiers were killed. That's roughly a man dead every 4 seconds. The campaign is also noted for its first usages of tanks in modern warfare, first being used in September. The operation dragged on until November. Overall, the objectives set by the British military were achieved, but the losses were unacceptably high. Just like Verdun and the Brusilov offensive, collective casualties numbered over 1 million, with 125,000 of the dead being British. Aircrafts on both sides were heavily active in the Somme region. Following the end of the Fokker Scourge, the Allies had gained firm control of the skies. Despite this, Manfred felt it was still the best location to become a fighter ace. He wasn't worried about dying, even though German ace Max Immelmann had been shot down and killed back in June, proving that these Knights of the Sky were only human. In August, Manfred's hero Oswald Boelcke paid a visit to Kovel. He was looking to recruit pilots for a new type of air group. Despite his excitement, he chose not to talk to the legendary ace, out of stubborn pride or possibly shame. That night, however, he was awoken by Boelcke himself. He had remembered their initial encounter back in 1915 and felt Manfred had the determination to make a great pilot. He simply asked him, "Do you still want to be a pilot?" To which Manfred, of course, said yes. Within a few days, he was on a train back to the Western Front. Boelcke explained what the mission was going to be. Morale was plummeting across the front. The German air service was getting shot out of the sky, and enemy planes were everywhere. Recon planes photographed the German lines and direct artillery. Bombers attacked strongpoints, and fighters strafed the ground. The German army needs results, and it needs heroes. What was being formed was a fighter squadron of top pilots, ready to turn the tide in the air. To a man whose favorite hobby was hunting, it was heaven on earth. The unit was officially called Jagdstaffel II, or Josta II for short. Boelcke affectionately called his men Cubs. He trained them to the best of his ability for a month, with tactics not seen before in aviation. Following Immelmann's death, Boelcke wrote down a set of rules all pilots should obey. He would know best, after all, as he had 18 kills to his name, which was more than anyone else alive. These rules eventually became known as the Dicta Boelcke, the world's first aircraft tactics manual. It consisted of 8 rules of combat. The rules were as followed. Try to secure advantages before attacking. If possible, keep the sun behind you. Always carry through an attack when you have started it. Fire only at close range and only when your opponent is properly in your sights. Always keep your eye on your opponent and never let yourself be deceived by ruses. In any form of attack, it is essential to assail your enemy from behind. If your opponent dives on you, do not try to evade his onslaught, but fly to meet it. When over the enemy lines, never forget your line of retreat. For the Staffel, squadron, attack on principle in groups of 4 or 6. When the fight breaks up into a series of single combats, take care that several do not go on for the same opponent. Bolke stressed all these rules as much as he could to his men. By September, coinciding with the launch of the new Albatros D2 fighters, he felt his men were ready. On September 17th, Bolke led his squadron into combat. The air was full of Royal Flying Corps planes. Manfred picked out a target, a 2-seated FE-2B. He stalked the plane the same way a hunter goes after a prize deer. The FE-2B noticed him and attempted to flee. Manfred quickly flew into a nearby cloud, and for a moment, the British plane believed it had escaped. Moments later, Manfred pounced, firing multiple rounds from his twin Spandau machine guns into the enemy's engine and cockpit. The plane quickly began to plunge. Manfred followed it, watching as it crashed into the ground. He yelled with joy. He knew this was a confirmed kill. He landed and inspected the ship. The aircraft's observer, Welsh Captain Tom Rees, was dead. The pilot, British Lieutenant Lionel Morris, was barely clinging to life. He died on the way to a field hospital. Rees was only 21, Morris was only 19. Josta 2's first patrol was a complete success. The 7 pilots who went up took out 4 British planes. Bolke celebrated by giving all the pilots ornamental beer mugs, but Manfred had a different idea in mind for celebration. He sent a letter to a jewelry maker in Berlin. He wanted a silver cup with the date of his kill and the type of aircraft inscribed. The cup was later delivered to his home in Schwiednitz. Manfred also made a habit of collecting the serial numbers from his downed foes. Sometime later, he would visit the graves of Rees and Morris. He placed 2 stones on the grave and vowed many more airmen would die by his guns. From here on out, every single plane shot down by Manfred would either fall behind German lines, thus always being counted as a confirmed kill. A week later, he scored another kill. This time, it was a 28-year-old pilot, Herbert Bellerby, followed by another kill the week after that. Each of these felt like a grand hunt to the 24-year-old Prussian. He would stalk them, then quickly attack when they least expected it. It was quickly becoming clear he was just a natural pilot. By October 16th, Manfred had shot down 5 aircrafts, officially making him an ace. Still though, his skills paled when compared to Bolke, who now had 40 kills to his name. Pilots from all sides thought he was invincible, an unbeatable foe. On October 28th, these assumptions were sadly proven to be false. During the heat of battle, German pilot Erwin Bohm was forced to take evasive maneuvers to avoid crashing into a British plane. In the confusion, Bohm's wheels ripped apart the upper wing of Bolke's fighter. It first looked like minor damage, but the wind quickly tore apart the fabric connecting the wing. Bolke's plane started to spin rapidly out of control as it lost altitude. It hit the ground at high speed, killing the influential father of fighter aviation. Bolke was only 25 years old.
It had to be God's will. It had to be God's will.
Manfred consoled himself by repeating that it had to have been God's will. A man that great doesn't die without a reason or purpose. Bohm was nearly inconsolable, but carried on the best he could. As a result, the German military renamed Josta II to Josta Bolke. The remaining pilots didn't mourn for long. They were up in the air again within days, eager to kill some British pilots to avenge their mentor. Manfred continued to rack up the kills, reaching 10 by November 20th. His mother Kunigunde continued to receive silver cups from Berlin, something that she wasn't entirely happy about, for she knew each cup likely represented a life lost, often a child's life. Manfred didn't see it like that. Like a hunter, he only saw prey. He didn't take great enjoyment over taking a life, but he wasn't very sorrowful about it. By late November, Jostabolke was now receiving new recruits. Many were eager to prove themselves as worthy of serving in a unit once commanded by a true German hero. One of these new recruits was a brash and colorful 19-year-old pilot named Werner Voss. He quickly struck up a friendship with Manfred, eventually becoming his closest friend. November 23rd was to be Manfred's most significant victory. On that day, he encountered an Airco DH-2 piloted by the very famous British ace, Major Leno Hawker. With 7 kills, he was often called the British Bolke. Hawker was a national hero, possessing the Victoria Cross, the highest medal available to the British military. Manfred merely saw his 11th kill. After driving away from his squadron mates, the two got into a turning duel. Each pilot tried to turn harder than the other, hoping to get an angle good enough to fire. Manfred's Albatross had more firepower and could climb faster, but Hawker's DH-2 could turn better. This turning battle went on for several minutes, with the two planes flying closer and closer to the ground. At the last minute, Hawker pulled up and attempted to flee towards his line. At that moment, Manfred opened fire, but his machine guns quickly jammed. By chance, however, the last bullet fired managed to strike Hawker in the head, killing him instantly. His plane flew out of control and violently crashed. The British Bolke was dead at 25. Following the duel with Hawker, Manfred was promoted to flight commander of Jostabolke. Despite heavy rain, Manfred continued to down enemy aircraft at an astonishing rate, and the German government was starting to take notice. With Max Immelmann and Oswald Bolke dead, they needed a new national hero to keep morale up. It's not hard to figure out why. The German military had withered for Dun, Brusilov, and the Somme. They had suffered grievous losses, and the image of a dashing hero could bring hope and optimism to the beleaguered men in the trenches and abroad. On December 20th, Manfred got his 13th kill, Captain Arthur Gerald Knight. This kill was a bit special. Knight had been one of the British pilots involved in the dogfight that killed Oswald Bolke. Whether he knew it or not, he had, in a way, avenged his mentor. Knight was only 21. 1916 for most of the world had been dreadful. Millions were killed in various battles, major and minor. Both sides had suffered embarrassing losses, from the British surrender at Kut in the Middle East to Austria-Hungary's bloody standstills along the Isonzo River in Italy. Ireland had briefly risen up in rebellion. Britain's war secretary had drowned, and the sister ship to the Titanic had struck a German mine and sank. It was truly an apocalyptic time. The world as a whole continued to mourn. But to Manfred von Richthofen, it had been a pretty good year. He had lost friends and a mentor, but had gained a reputation as a skilled aviator. The year to come would only cement that reputation. It would be his most successful year, and the year that would give him the legendary nickname of the Red Baron.
Death may be right in my neck, and I often think about it.
He's not the child that I once knew.
Who fired the bullet that took his life? January 4th, 1917 was the date of Manfred von Richthofen's 16th kill. A daring Canadian pilot named Alan Switzer Todd attacked 3 German Albatross fighters, one of which Manfred was piloting. The attack was brave but foolish, as the ace pilot easily gunned down the 31-year-old. A few weeks later, he received the Pour le Mérite, nicknamed the Blue Max, after the late Max Immelmann. It was the highest award in the German military, equivalent to the Medal of Honor. Newspapers across the empire mentioned him by name. He received more letters congratulating him than he knew what to do with. At the same time, he was promoted to Rittmeister, or captain, and given his own squadron, Josta 11. Manfred found a unique way to celebrate the promotion. It was around mid-January when Manfred made a fateful decision. He went over to his Albatross fighter and painted it red. The idea had just come to him early that day. He said the reason was twofold, so that his squadron could identify where he was at any moment, and to proudly announce to his enemies who he was. This quickly led to the Allies giving him several nicknames, although he wouldn't recognize the name we all know. The French called him Le Petit Rouge, or the Little Red One. The British called him the Red Devil, or Red Falcon. His fellow Germans started calling him Der Rotkampenflieger, the Red Fighter Pilot. The origin of the name Red Baron is as strange as it is unique. Manfred was never called that name his whole life. The first ever use of it came 1 month after his death, but only in passing. The first book written about him only called him the Red Knight. There are a few times Manfred was called the Red Baron after the war, but it was never common. In reality, the name Red Baron caught on in 1965, nearly 50 years after his death. Peanuts creator Charles Schulz had a son who often played with a model World War I plane. It gave him the idea to make his famous character Snoopy a pilot of the Great War. He then figured he needed a worthy enemy, so he chose Manfred. Within a year, the famous novelty song Snoopy vs. the Red Baron had been released, and the Red Baron character was featured in the popular It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown special. All of this coincided with renewed interest in the conflict due to the ongoing 50th anniversary. By the end of the 1960s, the name Red Baron was firmly entrenched in the minds of the public, and it was due to the actions of a Minnesota-born cartoonist, and not pilots of World War I. Manfred himself didn't realize it that day, but his decision to paint his plane forever immortalized him in history. Equipped with his new Albatross D3, Manfred was eager to show his new squadron how effective a pilot he was, but lousy weather quickly crept in, keeping him mainly on the ground in January and February. While grounded, the Western Front started to move, although it wasn't caused by combat. Following the devastating battles of 1916, the German military decided to tactically pull the battle lines further back. They felt it would be easier to defend if the line were narrower. This would free up units to prepare for an eventual offensive. The tactical retreat began in February, and the new battle line was heavily reinforced and better prepared than the original battle line. The previous battle lines and everything in between was burned and destroyed, including entire towns, bridges, and railways. This line was officially called the Siegfried Position, but the Allies would later call it the Hindenburg Line, after Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. The timing was perfect. The Allies had been planning another major offensive. The new commander of the French armies, Robert Nivelle, planned to attack through the Aisne region, and the British under Douglas Haig were to strike near the city of Arras. One thing that hadn't changed since the last major offensives in 1916 was aircraft technology. Despite controlling the skies and possessing more aircraft, the Allies had fallen behind on new aircraft designs and tactics. New planes like the Sopwith triplane were only just beginning to be used, and fighter squadron tactics were outdated, to put it lightly. Allied pilots greatly suffered when it came to training. Many were sent into combat with only a handful of hours in the cockpit. Safety was another problem, as none of these pilots were issued parachutes. Late in the war, some German pilots were issued parachutes, but the Allies never gave their pilots such devices, believing it would encourage reckless behavior. One thing the Allies didn't lack was heroic pilots. Those who survived their first taste of combat quickly learned how to stay alive. By 1917, every nation had its famous aviators, men with dozens of kills to their name. The British had pilots like Mick Mannock and James McCudden. The French had Georges Guynemer and René Fonck. Canada had Billy Bishop, the Australians had Robert Little, and so on. It was inevitable that these pilots would soon clash with the German air service, but Manfred was ready. Like Oswald Boelcke before him, Manfred taught his men all the tactics he knew. He had his own set of rules similar to the Duc de Boelcke. He didn't believe in fancy tricks like looping. He valued aggressive tactics that focused on accuracy. He often told his men to aim for the pilot, not the aircraft. He also spoke openly about his opinions of the French and British. He felt the French were naturally cowardly and prone to trickery. He felt the British were more of an equal because they carried Germanic blood. It's no secret Manfred harbored beliefs in Germanic racial superiority, something that was sadly typical for the era. In March, the weather began to clear, and like that, Manfred and his squadron were up in the air. By the 9th, he was up to 24 kills when he nearly died from a lucky shot. During the heat of battle, Manfred smelled gasoline moments before the plane's engine began to struggle. He quickly shut down the engine and glided into a field. Upon inspection, he noticed a bullet hole in the fuel tanks. Had he kept the engine on, the plane almost certainly would have burst into flames. The day before March 8th was when the February Revolution in Russia began. Motivation was primarily caused by the staggering losses suffered in the war, although the seeds of revolution had been growing for decades. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne, leaving control to the Russian provisional government. This quelled the open rebellion, at least for a while. All of Europe took notice, however, and feared the worst was yet to come. By April, Manfred was at 31 kills. This month would prove to be quite special to him, and hellish for the Royal Flying Corps. April was to be the month of the Great British and French offensives, and little did they know the dangers that awaited. Before the battles began, however, a new country would enter the war. On April 6th, the United States declared war on Germany. The direct cause was unrestricted submarine warfare, a German policy since February. Any ship spotted by a U-boat was to be sunk without warning, regardless of its nationality. American ships were soon being destroyed, and the US wouldn't sit idly by anymore. Another cause for war was the discovery of the Zimmerman telegram, a German message promising to give New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona back to the Mexican government if they joined the Central Powers. All of this came on the back of lingering resentment from the sinking of the Lusitania. While a great concern, the Germans knew it would take a year for the Americans to arrive in force. Manfred paid this news little attention, instead taking more interest in the fact that his brother Lothar had recently joined his squadron. 3 days later, on the 9th, the Battle of Arras began. Although the British quickly gained ground in the early days, most notably the capture of Vimy Ridge by the Canadians, the battle ultimately failed to break through the Hindenburg Line. Casualties were over 250,000. A vital part of the Battle of Arras was air support from the Royal Flying Corps. They deployed 365 planes, far outnumbering the Germans. Instead of keeping the skies clear, the British aviators were massacred. The outdated tactics, experience, and aircraft finally caught up to the Royal Flying Corps, and the results were ghastly. By the end of the month, at least 245 aircrafts had been lost, with 400 airmen either being wounded, captured, or killed. The average British pilot at the time was usually about 20 years old. They often had 20 or fewer hours of flight experience. Life expectancy was just 11 days. These young recruits were rapidly dying from gunfire, from being thrown out of the cockpit, from high-speed crashes to being burned alive. Life was short and painful. The ratio was close to 5 British planes lost to 1 German in exchange. Air superiority quickly swung to the Central Powers, and at a terrible moment. On April 16th, the Nivelle offensive began. The main attack was at the Chemin des Dames Ridge. Like Arras, ground was at first taken, but the assault, soon after, rapidly fell apart. The French were slaughtered by the thousands. Nearly 200,000 Frenchmen became casualties. The losses were so appalling, entire units mutinied and refused to advance. Robert Nivelle was quickly fired, and the entire operation was over by May. At the end of the month, the British had a nickname for what just happened. It became known as Bloody April, the lowest point in the history of the Royal Flying Corps, and the greatest achievement by the German Air Service. Leading that achievement was Manfred and his men. He managed to claim 22 kills during this period of time. His brother Lothar and close friend Werner Voss also distinguished themselves greatly. Manfred's father Albrecht visited the front on April 29th, just in time to witness his son shoot down another pilot. Albrecht was quite proud of Manfred, and so was Germany. With now over 50 kills, he surpassed even Bolke at his peak. The next day, Manfred managed to get into a dogfight with the greatest pilot he ever fought. During a routine patrol, he spotted a Newport 17 with a blue nose and attacked. He didn't realize at first that the pilot was Canadian hero Billy Bishop. The two fought for several minutes, with each plane receiving several bullet holes. Bishop's coat was pierced by a bullet at one point, and he was nearly blinded by oil in his eyes. But by the end, both pilots managed to limp away. Bishop would go on to survive the war with an impressive 72 kills to his name. There is, however, controversy over whether or not this dogfight even happened. Bishop was quite the bragger. One could even say a liar. Claiming to have survived a dogfight with the Red Knight of Germany would certainly make yourself look good. Manfred's unit likely did clash with Billy Bishop's men in late April, but beyond that, details are muddled. True or not, it only further proves that Manfred was a legend at this point. On May 2nd, Manfred was granted leave for a month. On that day, he met with Kaiser Wilhelm and his wife, who congratulated the young pilot for his skills. It was his 25th birthday, the last one he would ever celebrate. He proceeded to go home and visit his mother Kunigunde, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. Everywhere he went, he was followed by hordes of adoring fans, girls who begged for his hand in marriage, children who promised to become great heroes just like him. Although he didn't publicly say it, he secretly loved every minute of it. During this time, he began writing his own biography, or more accurately, told a female writer what to write. Manfred was hoping to publish it within the year, and by July it was finished. The book, called Der Rotkampenflieger, after his nickname, was a major hit. But wartime censors clearly got a hold of it and carefully edited it for maximum propaganda value. To the masses, Manfred was the spitting image of a German hero, and he liked that. Only a week into his month-long leave, Manfred was informed his brother had been badly wounded. Lothar had been given control of the squadron and had continued to perform admirably. On the 7th of May, he even claimed to have shot and killed the famous 20-year-old British ace, Albert Ball, although it's more likely he crashed during combat. On the 13th, Lothar was hit in the hip by anti-aircraft machine guns. The wound wasn't fatal, but it worried Manfred intensely. Since the beginning of the war, anti-aircraft technology had been steadily keeping pace with advancements in aviation. In the beginning, it was mostly infantry taking pot shots at passing planes, combined with the usage of the weak QF-1 pom-pom. But by 1917, it was far more robust. Field guns had been modified to fire shells at planes, often with timed fuses that exploded at a specific altitude. Anti-aircraft cannons like the QF 13-pounder 9CWT could throw shrapnel into the air with ease. But the most common type of anti-aircraft weapon was the machine gun. Weapons like the Lewis machine gun or the Vickers were capable of throwing hundreds of rounds into the air in a short period of time. When mounted to a swivel, a skilled gunner could pivot to nearly every angle and keep on firing. Fire from the ground was just as deadly as an enemy pilot. Manfred returned to combat on June the 14th. A week prior, near the small Belgian village of Messines, a gigantic explosive violently ripped through the German lines. The British had dug under the Germans and laid roughly 455 tons of explosives. The explosion was powerful enough to have been heard in London. An unknown number of Germans were killed instantly. Thus began the Battle of Messines. A battle meant to lay the groundwork for another British offensive. Although a minor fight with less than 100,000 combined casualties, it was a significant defeat for the Germans. Manfred quickly got into the air, hoping to help stem the tide. At the same time, the fearsome Gotha bombers began bombing London. The goal Manfred had initially flown for back in 1915 was finally happening. These raids ultimately killed at least 835 people. They had a minor impact on war manufacturing, but were psychologically very effective. Three days later, on June 17th, Manfred learned an old friend had died. George Zoomer, the man who had taught him to fly, died in a crash after being shot down. Manfred, well saddened, thought it was something Zoomer had looked forward to, as his battle with tuberculosis was coming to an end, and he didn't want him to die in bed. He'd rather go out fighting. George Zoomer was 27. Only a week after Zoomer's death, Manfred was given a new squadron to command. 4 squadrons, including Josta 2, were merged into a unit called Jagdgeschwader 1. The unit would quickly gain a legendary nickname, Richthofen's Flying Circus. This was because many other pilots decided to paint their planes bright colors, following Manfred's example. Also because the unit was constantly moved from airbase to airbase like a traveling circus. The unit quickly became the most elite flying squadron of the war. Notable members of this unit included Manfred's old friend Werner Voss, Kurt Wolff, Ernst Udet, and Hermann Göring. As commander of such an elite unit, Manfred was described as tough but fair, often sarcastic and humorful no matter. He wouldn't even swear, but wasn't above criticizing or replacing someone if they were less than adequate. Duty above all was his motto, and he would stress to every pilot that listened that the leader is the deciding factor for success. He still didn't mingle with his troops though during off hours. He remained quiet, keeping to himself and his dog, a Great Dane named Moritz, who he had owned since 1916. In July, the Battle of Passchendaele occurred in Flanders, a section of Belgium. Weather conditions were at first dry but rapidly began to deteriorate. Not since Verdun had soldiers fought in worse conditions. The mud was so thick and deep that men literally drowned in it. Vehicles got bogged down, the wounded couldn't be moved. It was an unimaginable disaster. Combat lasted until November, with casualty figures as high as 260,000 for the British and 200,000 for the Germans. By this point in the conflict, the Royal Flying Corps had learned its lessons from Bloody April. Aircrafts like the Sopwith triplane and the Bristol F-2B had become mainstays. Alongside new equipment was better tactics and training for Allied pilots. The Germans' new aircraft to counter these planes, the Albatros DV, was less than effective. Air superiority quickly swung back to the Allies' favor. Manfred learned this lesson the hard way on July 6th. The events of this day forever changed Manfred von Richthofen's life. During a patrol, Manfred went after a group of FE-2D recon planes, all in defensive formations. Canadian ace pilot Raymond Collishaw was reported to have been flying escort. In the heat of battle, a bullet, likely fired by one of the recon planes, hit Manfred in the side of the head. He lost all function in his limbs and was blinded. The Albatross quickly pitched downwards towards the ground. For a brief moment, Manfred felt it was all over. This is how all his victims felt as they crashed. Just before he hit the ground, Manfred regained feeling in his arms and sight, enough to pull off an emergency landing. Manfred fell out of the cockpit. Fellow pilots thought he was dead at first. He was rushed to a field hospital where doctors found a nearly 4-inch hole in his skull. He was patched up the best they could. Ironically, the pilot believed to have fired the shot, Donald Cunnell, was killed only 6 days after, almost killing Manfred. Cunnell was 23. Manfred was watched over by a nurse named Katie Otersdorf. Known for being highly protective of her patients, Manfred didn't get along with her at first, but they later became quite good friends, with newspapers even claiming they were lovers. Those rumors were never really proven, of course. By mid-August, Manfred was close to flying again, but things weren't the same anymore. He complained of intense headaches for the rest of his life, but that wasn't the only thing that changed. He became even more quiet and isolated. Privately, he began to question if German victory was even possible. It took until August 16th for Manfred to climb back into the pilot's seat. That same day, he got another kill to his name. This was 2nd Lieutenant William Harold Trant Williams. He was captured after being wounded in the crash, dying 6 days later at age 19. This kill felt different. Instead of the usual pride of having taken down a pilot, Manfred felt physically sick. German officers could tell he wasn't doing well and pleaded with him to return home for health reasons. Manfred refused. On the 26th, he killed another pilot, and again, he felt sick at the sight of a fallen enemy. 2 days later, Manfred received the first of a new type of aircraft. To counter the nimble Sopwith triplane, Anthony Fokker had designed his own triple-winged aircraft. He dubbed it the Fokker DR-1, and it would become forever linked with Manfred. Although slow and known to suffer from technical problems, the plane granted the pilot unbeatable turning speed and maneuverability. On September 1st, he claimed his first kill. The plane, an RE-8 recon plane, at first believed it was a friendly Sopwith. It was quickly gunned down. The pilot, Lieutenant John Bristow Cully Madge, survived, but the gunner, Walter Kember, was killed. He was 26. This was to be Manfred's 60th kill and the last one to receive a silver cup. Material shortages in Germany caused by the British blockade made silver too valuable to be wasted. Following another kill on September 3rd, Manfred was forced to take a month off, starting on the 6th. He returned home to his mother and hunted elk to pass the time. Kunigunde took notice that the child she once knew was different. She, at one point, politely asked if Manfred could stop being a pilot. He bluntly told her no, and asked if she was scared about losing her son. She clearly was, but didn't press the issue any further. While Manfred recovered, a series of new Allied planes were rolling out. The most notable was the Sopwith Camel, alongside the SPAD S-13 and the SE-5A. These aircrafts were fast, maneuverable, and deadly. Even with the Fokker DR-1, it was increasingly clear that the Germans would never control the skies again. War waits for no man, even perhaps history's most famous pilot. Every day, thousands of men continued to die on all fronts. But even in such bleak times, soldiers and civilians continued to idolize pilots, and another German pilot was becoming quite famous. Since Manfred's head wound and subsequent time off, Werner Voss had come into his own. He had 47 kills by late September, second only to the Red Fighter pilot himself. Voss was also a national hero now. Some pilots liked him more than Manfred because of his more down-to-earth and fun personality. He was an enthusiastic supporter of the Fokker DR-1, and like Manfred, had a notable color scheme. Voss painted his plane green and added a face with a large German mustache to the propeller. Despite the great success achieved by the Flying Circus, there were notable losses. Kurt Wolff, a beloved squadron mate of Voss and Manfred, was killed on September 15th at the age of 22. Voss was likely upset but continued to fight on like always. While feared, Voss, like Oswald Bolke before him, was not immortal, and this was sadly proven only 8 days after Wolff's death. On September 23, 1917, the greatest dogfight of World War I happened. Voss, while on patrol, spotted a group of 2 fighters. Voss quickly shot one down and badly damaged the other. He didn't have time to celebrate his 48th kill. Suddenly, a squadron of 7 British SE-5A fighters appeared. This was a legendary detachment of the 56th Squadron called B-Flay. They were led by James McCudden, one of Britain's top aces. His 6 other squadron mates were also aces. Instead of retreating, Voss ran right at them. For 10 solid minutes, Voss fought all 7 pilots, dodging and weaving between them in ways no other human had ever seen before. He managed to put bullets into each of the 7 aces. Several of these planes were so damaged they later had to be scrapped. But eventually, his luck ran out. During a head-on pass at McCudden, Voss received a barrage of bullets from Reginald Hodge, likely wounding him in the process. He stopped evasive maneuvers and just glided. Arthur Rhys Davies flew behind him and finished Voss off. His plane hit the ground and vaporized. Werner Voss, Manfred's closest friend in the entire war, was dead. He was just 20 years old. Immediately after, McCudden and his men believed they had just killed Manfred, not Voss. Upon finding out who it was, McCudden graciously admitted to being quite impressed by Voss. He said, quote, "As long as I live, I shall never forget my admiration for that German pilot. His flying was wonderful, his courage magnificent, and in my opinion he was the bravest German airman whom it has been my privilege to see fight." Arthur Rhys Davies was even saddened to see such a man die. He simply wrote, "If only I could have brought him down alive." Rhys Davies himself would only survive another month, being shot down and killed at the age of 20 on October 27th. While Germany mourned the loss of another hero, Lothar was finally allowed to fight again. It wasn't long until Manfred was called back into action. He bid his mother farewell on October 23rd. It took until November 23rd for Manfred to shoot down another pilot. In that time frame, several major battles had taken place, and an entire country was going through a revolution. October 24th was the start of the Battle of Caporetto. The Italian front had been incredibly stagnant, with 11 battles having been fought over the Isonzo River. Caporetto was different. The Austrian-Hungarians, alongside the Germans, crashed through the Italian lines. Hundreds of thousands of Italian soldiers surrendered. Italy seemed crippled. Some dubbed Caporetto the worst defeat in Italian military history. The commander of the Italian forces, the incompetent Luigi Cardona, was soon fired after the battle. Italy remained in the war, but its effectiveness was greatly diminished. The Battle of Cambrai was launched on November 20th. It's the first major use of combined arms warfare in history. Tanks, planes, cavalry, and infantry led the assault. At first, it looks like the German lines would be breached, but the tanks soon began to experience mechanical problems. By December, the gains made were already lost, along with over 100,000 casualties. But this event is minor compared to the turmoil Russia was experiencing. On November 7th, the Russian October Revolution begins, led by Vladimir Lenin. The entire country rose up against the provisional government, overthrowing it. In its place was a Marxist-inspired government led by Lenin and his faction, the Bolsheviks. Soon after seizing power, Lenin quickly started negotiating a peace treaty between Germany and Russia. Of course, not everyone was happy the government had been overthrown, as some were still loyal to the Tsar. Some were just anti-Bolsheviks who thought this new government would destroy Russia. These tensions quickly led to the Russian Civil War, which will last until 1923, killing millions, including the Tsar and his whole family. Germany didn't remotely care about the stability of Russia. However, they merely saw a chance to end the war in the east and move hundreds of thousands of men westward, along with some territorial expansion. German generals began drawing up plans for a massive offensive in the spring, hoping to knock France out of the war before American soldiers started arriving. Manfred, meanwhile, continued to kill pilots, but his self-loathing only got worse, with each plane destroyed. Christmas 1917 was very lonely for him. Erwin Bohm, the pilot involved with Oswald Bolke's crash, had died on November 29th at the age of 38, only a month after proposing to his sweetheart. It was this loss that made Manfred realize all the pilots trained by Bolke were dead. All but him. All these people he had met, who meant something to him, were gone. His best friend was dead, his mentor was dead. He had almost nobody left to turn to. The state of the war was all over the place by the year's end. Despite great success in Italy and Russia alongside knocking allied nation Romania out of the war, the Central Powers were on the brink of defeat. The Ottoman Empire was falling apart following the Arab Revolution and several successful allied campaigns in the Middle East, such as the fall of Baghdad and Jerusalem. America was training its men at lightning speed, and once these soldiers were ready, nothing could stop the Allies. Manfred likely knew this, that despite hope from the high command, the Central Powers were doomed. Manfred at one point found enough time to send a package to his youngest brother Bolko, now in cadet school. Whether he was happy or wished his youngest brother hadn't joined the military, nobody can say. Manfred felt old despite only being 25. In his package to Bolko, he writes that he hopes to visit him soon, personally. That was probably a polite lie. Manfred felt deep down he would be dead before too long. His intuition was sadly correct. (1918), the last year of the war, began with renewed hope for Germany. Early in January, German delegates met with their Russian counterparts in the town of Brest-Litovsk. The two sides were laying the groundwork for the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the end of the war in the east. Among the politicians was Manfred von Richthofen, sent as an observer to this historic moment. He cared little for political maneuvers and spent more time hunting. After observing the process, he was sent back to Berlin on the 20th to test various experimental aircraft. One aircraft caught his attention. It was called the V2. After advising some adjustments, he chose it as the best of all the experimental designs. This plane would later become the Fokker D7, the best aircraft of the entire war. Manfred, however, wouldn't live long enough to fly it. During his multiple weeks in Berlin flying prototypes, he was continually chased by admirers and fans. Germany was being torn under as food shortages, worker strikes, and growing resentment towards the Kaiser, but seeing a true hero on the streets still caught people's eyes. Instead of enjoying the attention, it merely depressed Manfred, that so many people would love unconditionally a man like him. After working in Berlin, Manfred paid a quick visit to his home in Schwiednitz. He flew over the cadet academy at Wallstatt, the same one he had attended so many years ago. He had done it for his little brother Bolko, hoping to make him happy. Bolko wasn't happy. He had really wanted to see his brother in person. He would never get that chance. Manfred visited his mother Kunigunde sometime that day, and it was clear to her that he wasn't the same child she once knew. He was quiet, not at all playful or fun. When she pointed out an old photo of his unit back in 1915, he bluntly told her they were all dead. One day she wanted to take him to the dentist, but he quietly said, "Actually, there is really no point in it anymore." Kunigunde quietly wrote down that he had seen death too often. Manfred seemed to hate himself more and more, calling himself a butcher and openly wondering if he deserved to live. On the last day of his stay, his sister Ilse drove him to the train station. He had a train waiting to shuttle him back to Berlin. Before they left the house, Kunigunde yelled out, "Goodbye, until we meet again, my boy." They would never see him again. In early March, the German High Command cancelled all German soldiers' leave time. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed on March 3rd. Germany now had an extra 50 divisions and a ticking clock. The American Expeditionary Force under General John Pershing was going to be fully operational in a few months. Now was the time to strike and end the war. The two leaders of the German military, Field Marshal Hindenburg and General Ludendorff, were planning what would become known as the Kaiserschlacht, or Kaiser's Battle. Manfred would be in the thick of it, but not entirely because of the High Command's orders. By contrast, many German officers wanted Manfred to retire from the front lines. They knew if he died, it would affect morale in the entire German military, and this fear wasn't just paranoia. There was a precedent. On September 11th, 1917, the beloved French pilot Georges Gunemeyer died under mysterious circumstances. French children had to be told that he had merely flown too high and couldn't return. His loss hurt morale badly. Manfred refused to retire, saying that if the average rifleman isn't given the chance to stop, why should he be given such a choice? The German High Command had no choice but to allow him to keep flying. On March 12th, days before the offensive began, Manfred took to the skies once again. A day later, Lothar crashed his triplane, receiving several severe facial wounds. While his brother recovered, Manfred continued to kill enemy pilots. Although he was emotionally a mess and hated himself more and more, his skills at dogfighting did not diminish. On March 21st, the offensive began, with a massive artillery barrage. The German armies swarmed across the British and French lines. The Allied forces were overwhelmed and beaten back. Using new stormtrooper tactics and weapons like the MP-18 submachine gun, the Germans advanced at a rapid speed not seen since 1914. Manfred had one mission: to exterminate the Royal Flying Corps and prevent them from harassing the main army. He didn't disappoint the High Command. By April, Manfred had 74 kills, far more than any living pilot at that point. The Kaiserschlacht was still advancing, but it was starting to slow. The armies had been moving so fast they were outrunning its supply lines, and the tactics being used tended to get the most skilled soldiers killed. If the campaign's outcome worried Manfred, he didn't say anything about it. He had other things on his mind. On April 2nd, he received his last medal, the Order of the Red Eagle with crown and swords. He possessed 26 citations, or medals. There was nothing left for him to earn. The only reward left was a wooden cross. The day before his final award, the Royal Flying Corps had ceased to exist. The British had combined them with the Royal Naval Air Service. The organization was now known as the Royal Air Force, and they were not to be trifled with easily. They had some of the most experienced pilots in the war, and some of the most advanced aircrafts in the world. While on the front lines, Manfred thought a lot about his autobiography. He had come to loathe it. It represented a person Manfred didn't even recognize, a boastful young man happy to be at war. In his own words, quote, "Thus, I have an uneasy feeling that the public has been exposed to another Richthofen, not the real me. Whenever I read the book, I smile at its brashness. I no longer have that brash feeling. Not that I'm afraid, though death may be right on my neck, and I often think about it." On the 8th, the flying circus was moved to the airfield at Cappy, Manfred's last transfer. In between patrols, he mostly kept to himself, attempting to write his own book on air combat. While his own personal tactics had been written down, Manfred believed that he needed to update the Dictabolke, but this project would remain unfinished. Despite heavy rain weather, Manfred was in the air as often as he could be. On April 20th, he shot down 2 Sopwith camels. The first pilot, Major Richard Raymond Barker, died in the crash. He was 23. The second pilot, Second Lieutenant David Greswold Lewis, survived and was captured. These were the last 2 planes ever shot down by the Red Baron, and his kill tally was now 80. After a lavish celebration for reaching 80 kills, Manfred left to arrange some details for his next time on leave. The father of the late Werner Voss had invited Manfred and his fellow pilot Hans Joachim Wolf to his estate in the Black Forest. He couldn't wait for this trip. The weather was still terrible, and his belief that Germany would lose the war continued to be proven right. The offensive was running out of steam by the day, and if this failed, defeat was all but assured. Manfred just had to get through one more combat patrol the next day, and he was free to visit friends and family. The following day's actions were also supposed to be the last time Manfred ever served on the front line. According to his mother, Kunigunde, Kaiser Wilhelm II had personally ordered that once Manfred had scored 80 kills, he was to be sent home permanently. Germany couldn't afford a dead hero. Sunday, April 21st, was a somewhat foggy morning. By 10:30 a.m., the fog had cleared, and Manfred was in the air again. The squadron was to take out some recon planes flying over the German line near the village of Sally Lorette. This was the typical combat mission he had done countless times before. Among his many veteran pilots was a new face, Wolfram Freiherr von Richthofen, his cousin. This was his first mission. He was as green as they came. Manfred was contest to make sure he would survive, no matter the cost. Wolfram was told just to observe combat, not take part in it. The following events that took place are greatly disputed, but broadly speaking, this is what happened. After finding the recon planes, 2 RE-8s, the flying circus tried and failed to shoot them down. At around 10:45 a.m., as they were leaving, they ran headlong into the 209th Squadron, who was also hunting recon planes. The leader of these pilots was Captain Arthur Roy Brown. Brown was guarding a rookie pilot of his own, Wilfred Reed, Wop May. May had been a friend of his back in school. Like Wolfram, May was told to stay out of the fray, as it was only his second combat flight. During the ensuing fight, May saw a lone triplane, and the temptation proved too much. He dove right after the enemy. The pilot was Wolfram, and Manfred quickly realized his cousin was in trouble. He dove after May, causing him to leave Wolfram and flee. The 2 planes quickly rushed below the cloud layer. May was following the River Somme, dodging and weaving to the best of his ability, which was a mistake. Zigzagging only slows down a Sopwith camel, making him easy prey. Remarkably, May wasn't aware that the pilot shooting at him was Manfred von Richthofen. During the fight, one of Manfred's Spandau machine guns jammed. The other gun's firing pin broke soon after, meaning he could only fire a few bullets at a time before being forced to recock the gun. These technical problems meant Manfred had to get really close to May in order to shoot him down. The 2 planes at this point were very close to the ground, barely missing the treetops and the river itself. During the struggle, Brown noticed May was under attack. At roughly 10:58 a.m., Brown dove and fired several shots at the triplane, but the angle was steep. At one point, they flew over the village at Vaux-sur-Somme. Both pilots nearly crashed into the village church steeple. Manfred was now deep behind the Australian line, and he had no squadron mates to back him up. Australian soldiers and machine gunners were already firing on him from below. May was rapidly approaching the imposing Morlancourt Ridge, where a lot of artillery and anti-aircraft guns were stationed. After initially flying westward to avoid the ridge, May chose to fly upward over the ridge. This move would normally have been a death sentence, but he got lucky. At roughly this point, Manfred's other machine gun had finally jammed, realizing both his guns were out of order, and that he was also breaking Oswald Boelke's rule to be careful when over enemy lines. Manfred dismissed May and began to make a hard right turn. Australian anti-air gunners and infantrymen who had already been firing at the triplane started firing at a faster rate now that May wasn't in the way. Among the Australian soldiers at the foot of the ridge firing at Manfred were machine gunners Robert Boo, William John Snowy Evans, and Cedric Bassett Popkin. Arthur Roy Brown was also still in the air, and he wanted to make sure his classmate made it home alive. It was now 11 a.m. In the middle of this turn, Manfred's plane immediately started to move erratically. A few seconds later, the triplane began to plummet. Manfred threw off his flight goggles and switched his engine off, hoping to make an emergency landing. The aircraft made a rough landing in a field near both Bray Corby Road and the St. Colette Brickworks. The landing crushed the plane's underbelly and damaged the propeller, but mostly stayed in one piece. Manfred hit his head on the back of his Spandau machine guns during the crash, badly injuring his face. Within a few minutes, several Australian soldiers ran over to inspect the plane, and what happened next is highly debated. A handful of soldiers claimed the young pilot inside the cockpit looked up and muttered some variation of the word kaputt, German for finished. Other soldiers claimed that he said nothing, for he was already gone. Either way, Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, was dead. He had been shot sometime during the battle. He was just 25. 11 days shy of his 26th birthday. He had died at the exact same age Oswald Boelke and Lano Hawker had been. It took only moments for everyone to realize who this man really was. Soon after, the soldiers started to take the triplane apart, hoping to bring home a souvenir. This action was only briefly stopped by German artillery fire. Later that night, the plane and its pilot were taken to a nearby military base. The remains of the aircraft were disposed of in a ditch, as little remained at this point. The next day, Manfred was given a lavish funeral by the Australian soldiers, a rare sign of respect in a heartless war. Manfred's death was top-page news across the globe. The news spread quickly as well. His death was on the front page of the New York Times by April 23rd. Many questions were soon asked about who killed Manfred. The British Royal Air Force eventually answered Captain Arthur Roy Brown had done it, basically stating that Arthur Roy Brown killed him due to the location of the wound. This statement was the first time anyone had called Manfred the Red Baron. Nobody knew it at the time, but this little nickname would one day be forever attached to the now deceased ace. The war would outlive Manfred by 7 months. By July, the Kaiser's battle was over. The German military had run out of energy and failed to knock out France. The American Expeditionary Force began to arrive, fully trained by the thousands. Losses were high. The Allies suffered at least 860,000 casualties. Germany lost 700,000 soldiers, men they couldn't replace. Germany would partially try again later that month with the Second Battle of the Marne, but it quickly failed. After that, it was open season on the German military. The Allies began the 100 Days Offensive with a crushing victory at the Battle of Amiens, where cavalry was decisively used. The French began to break through at the Battle of Soissons, marked with an effective use of tanks, planes, and artillery. By September, the American-led Meuse-Argonne offensive began. It was to be the largest military operation in U.S. history, despite also being the second deadliest battle in U.S. history. With at least 26,000 killed, the so-called Doughboys, along with other Allied forces, managed to pierce the Hindenburg Line. While the Allies made headway on the ground, the war in the air was a more mixed bag. The new German plane, the Fokker D-7, was far and away the most effective plane of the war. Allied pilots were dying at a rapid clip. Even famous ones weren't immune. Robert Little, Australia's best pilot, died in combat on May 27th, at the age of 22. James McCudden, the man who had helped kill Werner Voss, died in a plane crash on July 9th. He was 23. Aircraft pioneer Roland Garros somehow managed to escape prison and fight his way back to Allied lines after being held captive for 3 years on February 14th. He was quickly given a plane and sent back into the war. He tragically died on October 5th at age 29. But even as these legends died and air supremacy tilted towards Germany, it was still abundantly clear the war was about to end with the Allies victorious. The Central Powers were becoming undone. The first to fall was Bulgaria, a Central Powers member since 1915. The mostly stable Macedonian front was crushed by the Vardar offensive, leading to a surrender on September 29th. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire surrendered on October 31st after several crushing losses, such as the fall of Damascus. In the East, the Italians, now commanded by the talented Armando Diaz, started the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, which smashed the Austrian-Hungarian military for the last time. On November 3rd, they surrendered. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated his throne amidst a revolution that was sweeping the German Empire. The remaining German leaders would sign a peace armistice 2 days later. The war was finally over, but it had come at a terrible cost. Millions of people had died across the globe. Manfred von Richthofen was just one of many. But unlike the scores of men who had died on the Western Front, he wasn't allowed to rest in peace, for unlike the average soldier, the manner in which he died was hotly debated. Arthur Roy Brown might have been given the official credit, but a lot of people disagreed with that verdict. Everyone wanted credit for firing the fatal shot. Who had killed the greatest pilot of the war? Who had killed the mythical Red Baron? The mystery of who killed Manfred von Richthofen is arguably the greatest mystery of World War I. It is also a mystery with many questions. The first one we shall try to answer is simply, how did this happen? How did such an experienced airman make such a clumsy mistake? Manfred's mentor Oswald Boelcke had told all his pilots not to make risky mistakes, and always have an exit plan in mind. Manfred knew this. He knew it was dangerous to follow an enemy plane over the battle line. He didn't even need to follow May. He had successfully gotten this kid off his cousin Wolfram's tail. The move was very out of character, and there are several explanations. The most common one is related to his head wound. In 1999, the British medical journal The Lancet claimed that his near-fatal gunshot wound to the head was the primary cause of Manfred's death. The journal claimed the injury had affected his state of mind, leading to personality changes and possibly affected his reflexes and judgment skills. A similar study in 2004 from the University of Texas came to a similar conclusion, that his injury had caused him to become a target fixated on May, and he didn't realize until it was too late. This is compelling evidence, but there's a problem with it. When Manfred was severely wounded in 1917, he had 57 kills to his name. By the time of his death, he had 80. If the gunshot wound had damaged his reflexes and state of mind, then how was he able to rack up 23 kills without crashing or dying? He also commanded the most elite fighter squadron of the entire war and tested out the Fokker D-7 in that time frame. That was a point Royal Air Force officer Jonathan Young made in 2006, that this answer is too simplistic. So while brain damage sounds plausible at first, in actuality it's flawed. It's not the most likely explanation. The most likely answer is another kind of trauma, one probably caused by his head wound, but it's not physical trauma, it's mental. Judging from Manfred's writings and the comments made by others, it sounds like he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. His own mother had said he'd seen too much death and believed that changed him. PTSD wasn't very well understood at the time. It was mostly called shell shock and believed to just be a nervous reaction to artillery. PTSD is usually caused by one traumatic incident, in this case, the gunshot wound. The self-loathing, loneliness, and morbid comments, these are all symptoms of PTSD. Losing all his friends and having few people he could confide in only made things worse. All of this perhaps made Manfred more reckless, since he didn't care if he survived the war. There is a precedent for this happening. A few months after Manfred's death on July 26, 1918, the famous British ace Edward McManus was flying with a rookie pilot, hoping to help him score his first kill. The pilot, Lieutenant Donald C. Inglis, successfully shot down a German plane. Manic then dove under the clouds to confirm the kill, an action he had repeatedly advised his men not to do. He attracted anti-aircraft fire, and a single bullet hit the engine, causing it to catch fire. Manic's plane then crashed, killing the 31-year-old pilot. Roughly a month before, Manic visited a close family friend named Jim Elis. Manic was well known for being kind, thoughtful, funny, and upbeat. To his men, he remained outgoing and friendly. Elis saw someone else. He had changed dramatically. Gone was the old sparkle we knew so well. Gone was the incessant wit. I could see him wring his hands together to conceal the shaking and twitching. On the last day before Manic left to return to the front, he fell apart before his friend's eyes. He started to tremble violently. This grew into a convulsive straining. He cried uncontrollably. His face, when he lifted it, was a terrible sight. Saliva and tears were running down his face. He couldn't stop it. Manic had been a pilot since 1916. He witnessed many of the same traumatic events Manfred did. Manfred may have internalized his pain more than Manic, but the two men were clearly suffering and didn't feel they could go on much longer. Another aspect is the man he died saving. Wolfram von Richthofen was his cousin, and according to Manfred's writings, he cared deeply about his family. It's entirely plausible that he wasn't thinking about anything but saving a family member from death. Perhaps the fear of seeing family die, even a distant relative, when combined with PTSD, was all it needed to seal his fate. There were also the rough flying conditions that day. It was a fairly windy day, roughly 25 miles per hour, but it was blowing in from the east. That week, the wind would primarily blow in from the west. The wind could have been at the backs of the German pilots that day. This might sound minor, but this wind condition would have made the Fokker DR-1 move faster than usual. The plane was infamously slow, usually flying only 100 miles per hour at best. If he were flying with the wind at his back, he would have been reaching speeds close to 125 miles per hour. This added speed may have also led to misidentifying locations. At this speed, Manfred may have thought the town of Vaux-sur-Somme, which was deep behind the enemy Australian lines, was the town of Sailly-le-Sec, which was close to the German line. When you combine all these factors, PTSD, an intense protection of family, and a faster than average aircraft speed, it's easy to understand how Manfred ended up so far over enemy lines without realizing it. So that's one question answered, but the next question is, did the bullet come from the air or from the ground? Knowing if it was a pilot or soldier narrows the list of people who could have fired the shot. The first person to claim credit for killing Manfred von Richthofen was a gunner named Lieutenant Alfred Barrow from one of the RE-8 recon planes the Flying Circus had attacked earlier in the day. Barrow claimed a red triplane had attacked them. He fired several shots at the plane, and it crashed. While Barrow might have fired at Manfred, he didn't kill him. This was too early in the morning. Manfred's fellow pilots would have seen him crash. This claim is easily debunked. Now onto the most famous candidate for who killed the Red Baron. To this day, the Royal Air Force credits Captain Arthur Roy Brown as the man who killed Manfred. The opinion of the Royal Air Force hasn't changed one bit, and at first glance, it's easy to see why. Brown was behind Manfred for a moment. He dove onto him, firing several rounds in hopes it would force him off May, so the opportunity was certainly there to score the killing blow. He had several witnesses, including Lieutenant Francis Mellersh, who flew over Manfred's plane shortly after it crashed, and seemed to believe it was Brown's doing. There are, however, several problems with this theory. Brown was firing from quite a distance, roughly 300 yards, and aircraft machine guns back in the day weren't exactly accurate. Because of the speed of his plane, he had approximately 5 seconds to fire on Manfred. The odds aren't good that he got a hit. After firing those rounds, Brown disengaged and began to fly home, likely assuming that Manfred had backed off May, but he didn't. He kept going after the poor kid. Virtually all the Australian soldiers on the ground reported seeing 2 planes, not 3, in the air. This means Brown never witnessed Manfred's plane crash directly. He'd only heard about it from other eyewitnesses. The combat report from Brown himself is somewhat unreliable due to his health. He was not in good shape. Days after the battle, he was admitted into a hospital. He was suffering from influenza. Even more problematic is how long Manfred was in the air after Brown fired his shots, upwards of 2 minutes or more. And according to various soldiers from the ground, he wasn't acting erratically during that time frame. How long could Manfred have stayed in the air after being hit? Well, that requires looking at the most important piece of evidence in the case, the autopsy report. There is just one minor problem. There were 3 autopsy reports, and there are some notable differences in detail and in conclusion. The first autopsy was performed late on April 21st by a series of medical doctors. Prior to the report, various soldiers who witnessed the crash claimed to see bullet wounds in Manfred's back, chest, and face. A key witness to the first autopsy was a medical orderly by the name of Corporal E.J. Ted McCarty. McCarty got the best description of the body while preparing it for the autopsy. Manfred had suffered several wounds to his face. His nose was damaged and his jaw was badly fractured during the crash. 3 of his front teeth were missing and several more were pushed forward. McCarty wrote that he likely also suffered a concussion and believed he would have died from those wounds if he hadn't already been shot. McCarty checked the entire body and found only 1 gunshot wound. Right below the right armpit was a small entry wound. From the angle, McCarty judged that it was traveling upward at a 25-degree angle. The bullet entered the body and struck the spinal column, causing it to tumble. This tumbling bullet then proceeds to hit the heart and the lungs. The bullet then exits the body in a fairly massive exit wound 2 inches below the left nipple. The bullet itself was still in Manfred's coat. It was surprisingly in decent shape, although it was somewhat damaged. The bullet was a .303 British cartridge. McCarty would keep the bullet for himself, sadly losing it in the 1930s. A couple of soldiers noticed McCarty find the bullet, but nobody told the doctors. Later during the autopsy, doctors stuck a large wire through the wound to check how far the bullet had gone. That was the extent of the autopsy. His body wasn't opened up. The medical doctors agreed with McCarty on where the bullet entered and exited, but they didn't agree that it struck the spinal column. The doctors wrote down that the bullet likely went straight through the body. The report ends by claiming that the wound couldn't come from the ground. The second autopsy was performed early the next day. The conclusion was very similar to McCarty's. The bullet entered above the 9th rib, breaking it in the process. The bullet then struck the spinal column and likely damaged the heart and lungs before leaving the body between the 5th and 6th ribs. The doctors wrote down that this wound didn't come from the air or from the front of a plane. Soon after, another doctor, out of curiosity, did a quick autopsy on the body. His opinion was something of a mix of the 2 previous reports. His report has since been lost. Of the 3 reports, the second was considered the official report by the British military higher-ups and seemed to correspond well with the condition of the retrieved bullet. In our opinion, it's gotta be the most reliable report. This information makes it quite clear Captain Brown didn't fire the shot for 2 important reasons. A bullet going through the heart and lungs would have resulted in rapid death, upwards of 15 seconds after impact. If Brown had scored the killing blow, he would have never gotten close to Bray Corby Road. The triplane would have likely crashed near the River Somme. The location of the wound also casts doubt on details surrounding Manfred's last moments. It's possible he died during the crash, and most assuredly, he was dead by the time the Australian soldiers reached him. He had no last words. His lungs were filling up with blood, his jaw was fractured, and his heart was bleeding. Anyone who claimed he muttered kaput is either lying, misremembered details, or mistook a death rattle as words. The second key piece of information is the bullet wound and angle. He was hit on the right side of his body, close to the back but not exact. It was also traveling upwards at an angle. Captain Brown was diving and firing from the left. If he had hit Manfred, the bullet would have entered his back and traveled downward. So if it couldn't have been Captain Arthur Roy Brown at all, why does the Royal Air Force say otherwise? The answer is clearly reputation. The organization was not even a month old. If they claimed credit for shooting the best pilot of the war, it would make them look competent. It's also a boost to British and Canadian nationalism. They were strong enough to take down the Red Devil himself. Needless to say, many people, even in 1918, weren't confident Brown was the man who did it. Brown himself rarely spoke about the matter after the war. He became profoundly anti-war and probably didn't see the glory in killing a young man. No sense in bragging about it. Whether he came to doubt that his bullet had killed Manfred, we don't know. We, however, are supremely confident when we say the claim that Captain Arthur Roy Brown was the killer of Manfred Von Richthofen is debunked. The angle of the bullet also defeats a very fringe theory. During research, several people on YouTube claimed Manfred was killed by the Australian soldiers who found him. They claimed the triplane was brought down by a bullet to the engine, not a direct hit on Manfred. The plane crashes, and as he exits the plane, an Australian soldier shoots him dead. The theory seems to be originating from a book called Lords of the Sky, but where author Dan Hampton is getting this information from is rather interesting. This claim appears to be coming from German propaganda. Shortly after Manfred's death was reported, a few German newspapers spread rumors that he had been murdered by Allied soldiers after his plane crashed. This theory is patently ridiculous. The wound is from the side, not the front, and he was definitely dead by the time anyone found him. Anyone claiming this isn't tethered to reality and should be ignored. Obviously, it's debunked. Okay, now that we are sure it wasn't Captain Brown who fired the shot, who did? Well, judging by the angle and the fact that there were no other active Allied pilots in the area besides Brown and May, it's pretty clear the bullet wasn't fired by a pilot, but by someone on the ground. This is where the investigation becomes akin to a needle in a haystack. There were potentially hundreds of people on the ground firing at Manfred. Narrowing the focus becomes incredibly challenging. At this point, you might be wondering, why not try and match the bullet to the type of gun that fired it? That would make it easy to tell if it was a machine gunner or a rifleman. Well, there's a problem with that. The .303 British round was universal in the British military, which means nearly every weapon fired it. The Lee Enfield SMLE fired .303 British, the Lewis machine gun fired .303 British, the Vickers machine gun fired .303 British. The caliber of bullet doesn't rule out anyone. The next step is trying to figure out if the shooter was a rifleman or a machine gunner. One crucial clue was military doctrine at the time. Early on in the war, when riflemen were considered the best defense against aircraft, men were trained to fire in volleys at planes. The standard was 100 to 200 men all firing rounds as quickly as possible. With that many men, the chance of a critical hit was roughly 63%, which makes it entirely plausible. A critical hit was anything near the cockpit or engine block. Even late in the war, it wasn't unheard of for volley fire from soldiers to occasionally bring down a plane. The problem with the theory is how many men were firing, and was it scattered or coordinated? According to Corporal John Homewood, most of the Australian soldiers were sitting around when they saw the two planes enter the sector. Homewood himself had been playing cards. It seemed like quite the slow morning. Everyone quickly scattered and grabbed whatever weapon was available. This wasn't organized in the slightest. How many men picked up rifles and fired? Anywhere between a couple dozen and over 100, and there's no way to know the exact total. Regardless of numbers, the fact that all these men were badly disorganized reduces the likelihood of a critical hit significantly. These men were definitely firing, but not at a quick rate and not in unison. At best, a soldier could get 30 rounds off in a minute with a Lee Enfield SMLE, but that's in the absolute best of circumstances. With how fast the planes were going, each soldier was likely to only get 2 or 3 shots off. While it could not be fully ruled out that a lucky round hit Manfred, the odds are very much against it. This means the most likely person to have fired the bullet was a machine gunner. On that day, there were 3 machine gunners in the sector near Morlancourt Ridge who we are positive fired at Manfred. Other machine gunners over the years have also claimed to have fired at them, but these claims either lack witness accounts or are clearly mixing up separate days. The 3 gunners were William John Snowy Evans, Robert Bew, and Cedric Bassett Popkin. Bew and Evans were Lewis gunners. Popkin was a Vickers gunner. All three men wrote letters claiming to have shot Manfred down, and each has witnesses and defenders claiming they indeed did it. Odds are very strong that one of these men fired the fatal shot. In order to figure out which one of these three men did it, we need to look at each soldier, his weapon, his experience, and their location on that day. All three men were veteran soldiers. Snowy Evans was from Queen Anne, Australia, having worked as a shearer. He enlisted in 1914 and fought at Gallipoli and several other major battles. Throughout the war, he served in several units, including cavalry and artillery. On that day, Evans was serving as a gunner. He was 24 at the time. Robert Bew was a former oyster fisherman from Brooklyn, Australia. He enlisted in 1916. He was 24 that day. Sergeant Cedric Popkin was a tobacconist from Sydney, Australia. He enlisted in 1916 and was assigned a machine gun company from the very start. On April 21st, he was in charge of 4 machine guns near the ridge. Popkin was 27 years old. The three men all used machine guns at several points during the war. Evans had the longest service, having joined at the beginning of the war in 1914. Popkin had the most experience with a machine gun and was the only non-commissioned officer of the three. Now on to weapons. The Lewis machine gun was a light machine gun often used for mobile assaults. It weighed about 28 pounds, fired roughly 500 to 600 rounds per minute, and had a magazine of 47 rounds. The Vickers machine gun was considered a heavy machine gun. It was something that was fired from behind cover and not carried into battle. It weighed up to 80 pounds. The rate of fire was 450 to 500 rounds, and the feed system was a 250 round belt taken from an ammo box. The Lewis machine gun was usually just carried into battle, but could be mounted to a swivel for anti-aircraft duty. It could be loaded and unloaded by one person. The Vickers required several people to move, at least 2 to fire and reload, and could be mounted on a tripod or a swivel. Bew and Evans were using swivel-mounted Lewis guns. Popkin was using a Vickers gun, either with a swivel or a tall tripod mount. Purely from a technical perspective, the Vickers was the superior weapon for anti-air duty. It was water-cooled, so overheating wasn't an issue. It also weighed more, which helped with accuracy, meaning less recoil. The Lewis could fire faster, but because of the small magazine size, you only get 47 shots. And fully automatic fire would be wildly inaccurate. So when it comes to weaponry, Popkin has the edge over Evans and Bew, but both weapons are effective nonetheless. The final, and I would say most important question to decide who killed Manfred von Richthofen was each soldier's location on the battlefield. Bew and Evans were located in a valley close to the ridge. Popkin and another soldier, Private Rupert Weston, were on a nearby hill. According to Bew, he ran for his Lewis gun upon hearing reports of an enemy plane in the region, with Evans quickly following. Popkin ran over and took over Private Weston's Vickers gun upon seeing the enemy plane. Weston served as his assistant. Popkin's other 3 gunners moved too slow and didn't fire during the skirmish. Popkin got his round shot off first, firing 80 bullets according to his own writings, while May was still in front of Manfred. Bew and Evans soon after began firing at roughly the same time, just after May flew over their position. Bew and Evans were fairly close to each other, approximately 30 yards apart. Moments after Evans and Bew fired, the plane began to dip, and eventually crashed. This would point towards either Evans or Bew as the man. But there's one major problem. Evans and Bew both wrote that the plane flew directly at them while they were firing, same as Popkin. Manfred was hit in the side below the right armpit, a wound that's impossible from a direct frontal hit. This also goes for Popkin. He couldn't have hit Manfred from that angle, but that wasn't the only time Popkin fired. After flying directly at 3 gunners, Manfred made a large turn and began to fly back towards his line. Evans and Bew didn't fire again. Bew had expended all 47 rounds. Evans likely was in a similar situation. Popkin, however, still had ammunition to spare. He spun his Vickers gun around and fired another 80 or so rounds. He was firing at the critical moment Manfred was turning around, which exposed his side to enemy fire. The difference between Popkin's machine gun and Manfred was roughly 600 yards away. At this point, we can perhaps rule out Evans and Bew, but we now have another problem. If Popkin was the shooter, how did only 1 bullet hit Manfred, and how did he do it from such a long distance? 600 yards is quite a long shot and would require leading the target by a large margin, but it was well within the range of the Vickers machine gun. The gun could effectively fire up to 2,187 yards, and the maximum firing range was 4,500 yards, roughly 2.5 miles. so the weapon could absolutely hit a target at that distance, even a moving target. It's not easy, but it's doable. The lone bullet hitting its target can also be explained by the swivel and the wind. When a Vickers machine gun was mounted to a swivel, the weapon wasn't as stable when compared to a tripod. This led to a phenomenon known as the wild round occurring. This means that a round or two, instead of moving in the direction the barrel's pointed at, flies off in a different direction. This happens even more often when it's windy, and as we said before, it was quite a windy day. Popkin's gun was possibly mounted to a swivel that day. There is one more piece of evidence that favors Popkin over anyone else. The bullet was clearly slowing down when it struck Manfred. If he had been hit at close range, the bullet would have gone through his body and kept going. But instead it stopped inside his coat, indicating it was a long-distance bullet. Bew and Evans were fairly close to Manfred, roughly 400 yards away at the moment of impact. Both gunners claimed to have hit him at 200 yards. At both of these distances, the bullet would have gone clean through. It wouldn't have stopped inside his coat. If Bew or Evans had fired the shot, it would have also have been a steeper angle than 25 degrees. This is what I firmly believed happened on April 21st, 1918. Sergeant Cedric Popkin runs to one of his Vickers machine guns upon seeing a German aircraft entering his sector. He fires off 80 rounds as it flies directly over him. He turns the machine gun around and waits for another opportunity to fire. He sees the plane turning and heading for home. Popkin fires another burst of 80 rounds at the aircraft. He fires far ahead of the plane to compensate for the long range. Most of the bullets are either too far ahead or behind, but one bullet, perhaps a wild round, manages to hit the target. It goes through the side of the Fokker triplane. It's not a ricochet or indirect hit. The plane suddenly nosedives and crashes. With little doubt in my mind, I proclaim Sergeant Cedric Popkin as the man who killed Manfred Von Richthofen. But who was he really? Who was the killer of history's most famous ace? Cedric Bassett Popkin was in many ways both the mirror and the opposite of Manfred. He was born in 1890, the middle child of 5. Unlike the rich, privileged life Manfred got, Popkin was hardly wealthy. His father worked as an insurance salesman while his mother stayed at home. The family was constantly moving around. His mother died when he was 12, leading to a lack of parental supervision. Because his father was usually away due to work, his 2 older sisters had to raise him. He got into trouble with the law repeatedly. He was arrested for stealing and for hanging out with street gangs. He also often slept out at night. But he managed to straighten his life out, and by the age of 18, he was living on his own as a builder and later a carpenter. Unlike Manfred, he did have a sweetheart, a young woman named Nellie Ellen Bull, who he married in 1913. By the start of the war, he had 2 children and a lot to live for. His father died in 1916, leading to a younger brother enlisting in the army. He followed suit, enlisting on May 6th of that year. He served quite admirably in his machine gun company, outside of arguing with a sergeant on one occasion. By April of 1918, he was a sergeant himself, partly because the previous man in charge died. It was on a quiet morning when this humble working-class man, by chance, fired the bullet that killed the Red Baron. World War I finally came to an end on November 11th, 1918. At 5 in the morning, the Allies and Germany signed a peace armistice, but it wouldn't take effect until 11 in the morning, 6 hours later. In this short time frame, nearly 11,000 men became casualties that day, with 2,738 dying just hours before the end. Among the men who died that day was George Enwood Ellison, the last British soldier to fall. He had fought at Mons in 1914 through 4 years of trench warfare at places like Loo, Ypres, and Cambrai. He was shot by a sniper 90 minutes before the war's end. he was 40 years old. Augustin Trébuchan was the last French soldier killed in the war. He was shot while trying to tell his fellow soldiers that hot soup was about to be served. He died at 10:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the end. He was 40. George Lawrence Prince was the second to last soldier to die in the war. Originally from Canada, he was a Lewis gunner who was shot in the chest by a sniper during a short battle in the Belgian town of Ville-sur-Haine. He died at 10:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the end. He was 25. Henry Nicholas John Gunther was a German-American soldier and the last man to officially die in World War I. He charged 2 machine guns on his own, even as the German soldiers tried to yell that it's almost over. He had recently been demoted for advising a friend to avoid the draft, and felt he needed to prove he was still a good soldier, and still a good man. He was repeatedly hit in the chest and died instantly at 10:59 a.m., 1 minute before the end. He was only 23. Even after November 11th, men continued to die in events directly or indirectly caused by the war. On June 21st, 1919, at Scapa Flow, Scotland, the German High Seas Fleet was intentionally scuttled. This was technically an illegal action. 8 German sailors were shot dead by British soldiers that day, but they weren't the last to die. Just after midnight on June 24th, German sailor Kuno Eversberg was shot in the back, likely by British sailor James Woolley, who was reportedly drunk and vengeful for losing 2 brothers in the war. He died 5 days later on the 29th. Woolley, also 19, was eventually found not guilty in court. Kuno Eversberg was the last person verifiably killed in a military action directly related to the war, despite it officially ending 7 months prior. Eversberg was only 19. For some, November 11th didn't mark the end of fighting. In places like Russia, Germany, Greece, and Ireland, uprising and civil wars began or continued, all in some form or another influenced by the recently ended conflict. The blood wouldn't fully stop flowing for some until many years after the Great War ended. 159 nations took part in World War I. Over the course of the war, 70 million people served. 40 million people became casualties, with 20 million dying. 20 million men, women, and children died in this war. For those who lived, life was never the same again. Thousands returned home, missing body parts and bearing horrific wounds. Countless more suffered from the unspeakable memories of the conflict. Those who lived soon had to face the deadly Spanish flu pandemic, which killed anywhere between 17 and 100 million people. The generation of people who came of age in this conflict was forever battered and lost. They became known as the Lost Generation, a generation where innocents died in the mud and blood of war. World War I is often talked about a pointless war that changed nothing. This isn't entirely true. The war ended the era of empires and monarchies in Europe for the most part. Technology rapidly evolved, not just in weaponry, but in medicine and communication. Many countries gained a sense of identity after suffering so greatly. The efforts of women throughout the war on all sides eventually led to expanded rights, including the ability to vote. These are all wonderful things, but was it worth 20 million lives? One of those 20 million was a child from Germany who had several siblings and 2 loving parents. But that's not how Manfred von Richthofen is remembered, is he? He isn't remembered as just one of the 50,000 airmen who died in the war. He is remembered as this great hero of the war, an icon of the conflict. He perhaps shouldn't be recognized as such. Like our Anne Bonny video before him, he is a complicated man, one who cannot be judged as merely good or bad. He was a child of war, raised from a young age to fight the enemies of Germany, to promote the toxic ideas of nationalism and imperialism. He so gladly fought Russian, French, and British soldiers, men who didn't deserve to bleed for the ambitions of Germany. He held outdated racial views and wanted nothing but glory for killing others. But he changed by the end. He became a man who viewed war as destructive and saw himself as a monster, not a great hunter. He wasn't a true Knight of the Sky, but in reality, nobody is. Fighting in a plane wasn't honorable by its very nature. It was a miserable experience. Men under the age of 20 breathed in toxic oil fumes, dealt with altitude sickness, the cold air attacking exposed skin, and often flying with ear-splitting headaches. These children were shot dead in wooden boxes, held together with canvas and wire. It wasn't glorious. Manfred knew this deep down, that this notion of chivalry was a bright and shining lie. He went to his grave gladly accepting all the wrongs he felt he had done. In his last moments, he was probably at peace, knowing the end had come. What type of man would he have become? I can't say. Perhaps he would have become a high-ranking Nazi official, someone who would all too easily commit war crimes for Germany. Maybe he would have never found peace with himself, becoming one of many sad stories of World War I veterans who committed suicide. He might have become a man willing to state that war is wrong and actively fought against the Nazis in the 1930s. We can never say for sure. We can only feel sorrowful for the man he once was, and mourn the man he was becoming. At the end of the day, he was a child, and deserved a chance to become a better man, a chance to live a life beyond war. He is so much more than a name or an image. He was a human. The Richthofen family never forgot Manfred. His father Albrecht died peacefully in 1920 at the age of 61, still proud of his oldest son's service in the war. Lothar ended the war with 40 kills to his name, but with the German air service dissolved, he found work on a farm. Soon after, he took an industrial position and married Countess Doris von Kieserling in 1919. They had 2 kids before the marriage fell apart. Not long later, Lothar found a job as a commercial pilot, carrying mail and people from Berlin to Hamburg. Sadly, his plane crashed in 1922 following engine trouble. The 2 passengers, American actress Fern Andre and German director George Blum, survived. Lothar sadly didn't. He died like his brother, amid the wreckage of an airplane. He was 27. His mother Kunigunde lived until 1962, passing away at the age of 93, still deeply missing her 2 sons. His sister Ilse lived a mostly happy life, dying in 1963 at age 73. Manfred's youngest brother Bolko lived a quiet life, never drawing attention to himself. He died in 1973 at the age of 68. Manfred's beloved dog Moritz was adopted by fellow pilot Alfred Gerstenberg after his death. He lived out the rest of his life on Gerstenberg's farm until he peacefully passed away in the 1920s. Manfred's cousin Wolfram, however, went in a different direction. He became a key Nazi official in the Luftwaffe. The Air Force of Nazi Germany had been created under Manfred's old squadron mates Ernst Udet and Hermann Göring. Udet ultimately killed himself in 1941 at age 45, supposedly because he feared Germany would lose World War II. Göring remained one of the highest-ranking officials in the Nazi government. He also killed himself in 1946 at the age of 53. His reason was entirely due to being found guilty of war crimes during the Nuremberg trials. Wolfram would have likely suffered a similar fate had he not died of a brain tumor on July 12, 1945, at the age of 49. Manfred's record of 80 confirmed kills lasted until June 30th, 1941. It was broken by a German ace, Werner Mulders, likely a fan of the Red Fighter pilot. Upon his death in a crash, he was buried not too far from Manfred. In the years after World War II, a fighter wing was named Jagdgeschwader 71, Richthofen. It was commanded at one point by Erich Hartmann, the most successful ace in history. The squadron remains active to this day. The lives of the men who fought Manfred on his last day varied heavily. Alfred Barrow retired to New Zealand, where he faded into history. Arthur Roy Brown died in 1944, a well-respected RAF pilot and an altogether good man to the very end. He was 50. Wilfred May lived quite a charmed life. He ended the war with 13 kills, an ace pilot in his own right. In the years after the war, he remained a pilot, returning to his native Canada. There he became an unlikely hero, saving the lives of an entire town in Alberta from an outbreak of diphtheria. May managed to deliver life-saving medicine in a race against time. In the 1930s, May helped track down a deranged murderer in the Yukon area. His life was anything but dull. Wilfred Reed May died in 1952 at the age of 56, a beloved man who remained ever so glad he had survived World War I. William John Evans' life was sadly short. He became a drifter in Australia after the war, possibly unable to re-enter society after suffering through so much death. He died homeless in 1925 at the age of 31. Without a photo taken or anyone to remember him, the thought he might have killed Manfred Von Richthofen likely gave him comfort, even as his life slowly faded away. Robert Bew didn't live an easy life. He was gassed by the Germans and later shot. He survived both injuries, but his health was never great afterward. While in the hospital, he was diagnosed with inflammation of the heart, leading to more problems. He returned home from the war and went back to fishing. It's all he could do without a war pension. He worked day and night trying to support his family. Bew lived until Anzac Day in 1964, when he died suddenly while fishing. He was 71. All through his life, he still strongly felt he was the one who killed Manfred, so much so that his old home still bears a plaque claiming so. Cedric Bassett Popkins' story is a perfect summary of World War I. Instead of being the triumphant Australian hero, he suffered greatly. 2 months after Manfred's death, Popkin was hit with shrapnel from artillery. His right leg had to be amputated to save his life. He was discharged in 1919 and returned home to his wife Nellie and 2 children. A changed man, both physically and emotionally. He spent the rest of his life working as a postmaster and later as a carpenter, just like he did in his youth. He never let the loss of his leg stop him from doing his duty, which included handing out letters of condolences to families during the Second World War. Popkin also served as president of a local soldiers' club, eventually being given a golden walking stick for his kindness and generosity. It was the only real award he ever got in his lifetime. He was never given any trophy or medal for his actions on April 21st. Truly a forgotten hero from a forgotten war. He rarely talked about the war that had taken so much from him. When often asked about that fateful day in April, he would admit he probably had fired the shot, but also say it wasn't anything worth glorifying. In his mind, killing such a talented young man was a waste. Like he did in his youth, Popkin and his family were constantly moving from town to town. Nellie died in 1965, having been married to Popkin for over 50 years. Cedric Popkin passed away on January 26, 1968 at the age of 77, in Tweed Heads. To his family, he is better remembered as a good man, rather than a killer of a famous pilot. Manfred's own story continued long after his own death. His grave was dug up and desecrated by local French civilians the day after his burial. The locals likely mistook him for a German pilot who had recently bombed their village. After the war, he was dug up again and moved to a new cemetery at Fricourt near the old Somme battlefield. But this didn't last. His mother wanted her son home, but the new German government felt he belonged in a grand cemetery. He was reburied at the famous Invalidenfriedhof Cemetery in Berlin, near the graves of German heroes as far back as the 1700s. Sadly, his grave was repeatedly shot at during the Cold War by Russian soldiers, primarily due to escapes from East Germany running through the cemetery. Eventually, Manfred was dug up and buried for a 4th and final time in 1975. He was laid to rest in a small family plot at Südfriedhof, close to his 2 brothers, sister, and mother. He still rests here to this day. By then, his legacy was forever sealed as the Red Baron, the iconic death dealer of the Great War. A reputation he will never get rid of. By now, the last connections to World War I are forever broken. Everyone who served is sadly gone. The last witness to Manfred's death was Sergeant Edward David Ted Smout. As a young 20-year-old soldier fighting for Australia, he never forgot both the sight of Manfred's plane crashing and the vivid image of the young man's still body. He died on June 22, 2004, at the age of 106. The last overall combat veteran was a British-born Australian sailor named Claude Schulz. He joined the Royal Navy at 14. He saw action against Zeppelins during the war and was even a witness to the Scapa Flow scuttling. He proudly served until 1926. He soon joined the Royal Australian Navy, serving through World War II until 1956. He passed away on May 5, 2011 at the age of 110. The last veteran of the entire war, a waitress serving in the Women's Royal Air Force named Florence Green, passed away on February 4, 2012. That was almost 10 years ago now. Both an eternity and like yesterday. Most of us had family who served. Often, we only wish we could hug and thank them for doing the best they could. But we cannot return to their time. We can only look back from where we came. While everyone may be gone, their memories live on. They live on through their children and grandchildren, and by the photos and stories they left behind. The war wasn't just, but these men, women, and children often were. They do not deserve scorn for the actions of empires, but respect. For even in a war of unending sorrow, there were heroes. There were good people. These people deserve to be remembered. Before we go, we will do a solemn roll call for all the pilots downed by Manfred Von Richthofen. Not all these men died. Some were wounded or captured, but each of these men had a unique story, forgotten by history, but not by us. It's the least we can do to honor them. For we must never forget that behind every gun sight was a human life. A person with a mother and a father. A person who deeply cared about them no matter what. Some of these men died saving others in the war. Some lived to tell that story. Always remember, if every man but one came back, he was still some mother's son. Lest we forget that war is a terrible thing. Lest we forget, those who we remember will never truly die. Whether it's Albert Mayer or Florence Green, we still remember them. Whether it's Manfred or the 80 planes he shot down, we still remember them. We still miss them, lest we forget.